You know Zeus, the lightning god, king of Olympus. But do you know the monster that almost killed him? Or the goddess who stepped out of his skull, fully armed? Or the immortal beauty who triggered a 10-year war with nothing but a golden apple? This isn't just a list. It's the full story. How the gods were born, how they battled monsters, and how their world finally ended. And by the end, you'll understand how the gods lived, how they ruled, and what destroyed them. But first we start with Zeus versus the monster that almost killed him. We're telling it in the order it happened, from the first god to ever exist, to the last one left when it all came crashing down. Picture this, a creature so massive that when it stood, its head scraped the stars, its eyes shot lightning, its breath was molten rock. 100 dragon heads sprouting from its shoulders, each one screaming a different language of destruction. This is Typhon, the god killer. Zeus had never faced anything like it. This wasn't just another monster. This was a weapon, built specifically to destroy him. The battle started when Typhon rose from the depths of Tartarus. The earth cracked open. Mountains collapsed. Seas boiled into steam. The very fabric of reality began tearing apart. Zeus threw everything at it. Lightning bolts that could shatter continents. Thunder that split dimensions. He summoned storms that could level cities. But Typhon just laughed and kept coming. Each of the monster's 100 heads breathed a different element. Fire, ice, poison, lightning. Sound itself became a weapon as Typhon's roar shattered the pillars of heaven. For the first time in his reign, the king of gods was losing. Badly. The other Olympians? They panicked. These were the gods who had conquered the Titans, who had thrown their enemies into the deepest pits of hell, and they ran like scared children. Athena became an owl and fled. Aphrodite turned into a fish and dove into the sea. Even Ares, the god of war, transformed into a boar and ran squealing to Egypt. Only Zeus stood his ground. And even he was getting torn apart. Typhon grabbed the king of gods with claws the size of mountains, ripped the tendons from his hands and feet, left him helpless, mortal, broken. But here's the thing about that battle. It wasn't random. It was revenge. Calculated, personal, cosmic revenge. Because Typhon wasn't just any monster. He was Gaia's final weapon. The Earth's last desperate attempt to destroy the gods who had betrayed her. And to understand why she created him, why she wanted Zeus dead, why the entire universe almost ended that day, we need to go back to the very beginning. This is the full story. How the gods were born, how they ruled, and what destroyed them. It starts with pure nothingness itself. Gaia, the Earth's first love, first betrayal. Gaia wasn't just the goddess of Earth. She was the Earth. Every mountain that pierced the sky, her spine. Every ocean that crashed against shores, her blood flowing through cosmic veins. When she laughed, flowers bloomed. When she wept, floods drowned civilizations. She was the first mother, the first creator, the first victim. From her own body, she willed her first children into existence. The Aurea, living mountains. Pontus, the primordial sea, wild and untamed. But then she created her masterpiece, and her curse. Uranus, the sky itself. He was perfect, infinite, beautiful beyond description. He covered her like a blanket of stars every night. She fell in love with the very concept of him. This was the first love story. Earth and sky locked in eternal embrace. When they came together, their passion created the next generation. The Titans, being so powerful, they could reshape reality with a thought. Oceanus controlled every drop of water. Hyperion was living light. Cronus could bend time itself. But their love also created something else. The Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who forged lightning. The Hecaton Shires, 100-handed monsters who could fight entire armies alone. Uranus looked at these children and felt something new, something that would poison every divine generation. Fear. They were too powerful, too unpredictable, too likely to overthrow him. So he made the first great mistake of divine rulership. He tried to eliminate the threat by destroying his own children. He grabbed the Cyclopes and Hecaton Shires and shoved them back into Gaia's womb, buried them alive in the depths of the earth. Imagine her pain. Her husband using her body as a prison for their children. Every day, she felt them clawing at her insides. Every night, she heard their screams echoing through her bones. But Uranus wasn't done. He stationed himself permanently above the earth, never letting night fall, never giving Gaia peace, always watching. This was the birth of paranoia, the first tyrant who destroyed his family to protect his throne. And Gaia? She was planning something that would change the universe forever. That betrayal would birth the weapon that would end the age of sky and begin the age of titans. Tartarus, the cosmic prison that judges gods. While Gaia wept and Uranus ruled, something else stirred in the depths of reality. Something that would become the ultimate threat hanging over every god's head. Tartarus. Not just a place, a living entity. A conscious pit that existed beneath the deepest foundations of Earth. If you fell into Tartarus, you would fall for 9 days and nights before hitting bottom. And the bottom was worse than death. Tartarus was where the universe stored its nightmares. It was intelligent, aware, and hungry. It fed on suffering. It grew stronger with every scream that echoed through its depths. But here's the twisted part. Tartarus wasn't evil. It was necessary. Even gods needed to face justice. Even cosmic powers needed a prison. And Tartarus was the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner. Think of it as the universe's maximum security prison. But the prison itself was alive. And it had opinions about its inmates. The first taste of divine blood came when Uranus's children were imprisoned. Tartarus felt their pain, their rage, their desperate need for freedom. And it liked what it tasted. From that moment on, Tartarus became the cosmic balance. Step too far out of line, and you'd find yourself falling through 9 layers of reality into eternal torture. But Tartarus wasn't just about punishment. It was about cosmic order. When titans would later imprison their own children, Tartarus would be watching. When Zeus would defeat his father, where would Cronus end up? When giants would rise against gods, Tartarus would swallow them whole. And here's what made it terrifying. Tartarus remembered everything, every injustice, every abuse of power, every moment when the strong crushed the weak. It kept score, and eventually, everyone's bill came due. The Titans thought they were safe on their thrones. The Olympians would think they were untouchable. But Tartarus knew better. It knew that every tyrant becomes a prisoner. Every king becomes a slave. Every god, eventually, falls. Sometimes, late at night, you could hear it laughing, a sound like grinding stone and screaming wind, because it was patient. It had eternity to wait. But first, the sky had to fall. Someone had to pay for the first great crime. And that someone was about to meet his end. Uranus, the sky god's brutal end Uranus, stretched across the heavens like a living constellation, beautiful and infinite. He was the first king of the universe, the first ruler to hold absolute power over all creation. And like every absolute ruler, he became absolutely paranoid. His children with Gaia were magnificent. The Titans, beings of raw power who could reshape reality. But then came the others, the Cyclopes, the Hecaton Shires, monsters too powerful, too unpredictable, too likely to overthrow him. So he made the choice that would define every divine generation. He tried to eliminate the threat by destroying his own children. He grabbed the Cyclopes and Hecaton Shires and shoved them back into Gaia's womb, used his wife's body as a prison, made her listen to their screams every day. But Uranus wasn't done. He stationed himself permanently above Earth, pressing down on her, never letting her rest, always watching, making sure no one could challenge his power. This was the birth of tyranny, the first ruler who destroyed his family to protect his throne. And Gaia? She was done being a victim. She reached deep into her own body and forged a weapon. A sickle made from the hardest stone she could create, sharp enough to cut through divine flesh, sharp enough to end a god. Then she called her remaining children, the Titans, and offered them a choice. "Free your brothers," she whispered, "or watch them suffer forever." Most were too afraid. You don't attack the sky itself. You don't raise your hand against the king of the universe. But Cronus stepped forward, the youngest Titan, already twisted by his father's cruelty, already hungry for power, already willing to do anything to claim the throne. "I'll do it," he said, and Gaia smiled. That night, when Uranus came down to embrace Earth, Cronus was waiting, hidden in shadows, with his mother's weapon of vengeance. As the sky god lowered himself to touch his wife, his own son struck. The sickle cut through divine flesh like paper. Uranus screamed, the first sound of true agony ever heard in the heavens. His blood rained down on Earth, and from each divine drop, new beings were born. The Furies, winged goddesses of vengeance, the giants, beings of pure rage, the Malaya, nymphs of war and bloodshed. Violence had entered the world, and it would never leave. Uranus looked down at his son with dying eyes and spoke the first prophecy in history. "You will suffer as I have suffered. Your own child will destroy you as you have destroyed me." Then the sky god faded into the stars, leaving only his curse. Cronus had won. He was king of the universe. But the price of power was already being calculated. Nyx, the night that even gods fear, while blood rained from the dying sky and Cronus claimed his throne, something else moved through the cosmos. Something older than gods, older than titans, older than rulership itself. Nyx, the night incarnate. She wasn't just darkness. She was everything that belonged to the shadows. Dreams, nightmares, death, sleep, the quiet moments when the world transformed into something else entirely. And here's what made her truly terrifying. Even Zeus, the future king of gods, would fear her. Nyx was one of the first beings to emerge from chaos, and she was nothing like her cosmic siblings. While Gaia nurtured and Uranus ruled, Nyx simply existed. She flowed through the universe like liquid starlight. She was beautiful in a way that made mortals weep and gods tremble. Her dress was the night sky itself, studded with stars that moved like living diamonds. Her hair was darker than space between galaxies. When she smiled, comets streaked across the heavens. But Nyx wasn't interested in power games or family drama. She had her own agenda. She gave birth to her children alone, willing them into existence from pure darkness. And what children they were. Thanatos, death himself. Not cruel, not kind, just inevitable. He moved through the world like a gentle wind, touching mortals when their time was done. Hypnos, sleep, death's twin brother. He brought peace to the exhausted and dreams to the restless. But he also brought nightmares when darkness demanded it. The Oneiroi, the dream gods. They controlled every vision behind closed eyes. Morpheus shaped dreams of hope. Phobetor brought nightmares of fear. Phantasos created impossible visions that drove mortals mad. Nemesis, divine vengeance. She made sure every crime was punished, every injustice balanced. She was the cosmic force that guaranteed what goes around comes around. And then there was her most dangerous child, Eris, discord incarnate, the goddess of strife and conflict. She was the whisper that turned friends into enemies, the doubt that destroyed trust, the pride that started wars. She was already planning her masterpiece, a golden apple that would one day burn Troy to the ground. But Nyx's true power wasn't in her children. It was in her presence. She was the reminder that no matter how bright the day, no matter how powerful the sun, no matter how mighty the gods, darkness always returns. While Uranus bled and Cronus celebrated, Nyx watched from her palace of shadows. She saw the Titan claim his throne. She saw him devour his own children. She saw Zeus rise to power, and she smiled, because she knew something they didn't. Every light casts a shadow. Every hero has a dark side. Every golden age ends in darkness. The night always comes. And when it did, she would be waiting. The primordial powers had set the stage. The first great crime had been committed. The cycle of violence had begun. Now the real horror was about to start. The Titan who would devour his own children was ready to prove that power always corrupts. Cronus, the Titan who devoured his own children, Cronus sat on his throne of power, the sickle that killed his father still dripping with divine blood. He was the new king of the universe, the youngest Titan who had dared to strike down the sky itself. Finally, the cosmos had a ruler who understood strength. But Uranus's dying words echoed in his mind every single day. Your own child will destroy you as you have destroyed me. At first, Cronus laughed it off. He was different from his father. He wouldn't make the same mistakes. He would be a just ruler, a fair king, a loving husband to his sister wife Rhea. The Titans celebrated their new golden age. Oceanus controlled the world's waters. Hyperion brought light to the cosmos. Themis maintained divine law. For the first time in cosmic history, the universe seemed balanced. But power changes everything, and prophecies have a way of making themselves true. Cronus began to see threats everywhere. When his brothers gathered, were they plotting against him? When his sisters whispered, were they planning rebellion? Every shadow could hide an assassin. Every smile could mask betrayal. Then Rhea became pregnant with their first child. The moment she told him, Cronus felt it. The same primal fear that had driven his father to madness. This child would be powerful. This child would grow up. This child would remember who held the throne. And one day, this child would come for him. So when Rhea gave birth to their daughter Hestia, Cronus made a choice that would define him forever. He grabbed the newborn goddess and swallowed her whole, alive, conscious, screaming. Rhea's horror was indescribable. She begged, she pleaded, she threatened, but Cronus was already lost to paranoia. It's for the greater good, he told himself, for cosmic stability. But the prophecy demanded blood, and Cronus kept feeding it. When Demeter was born, he devoured her before she could take her first breath. When Hera entered the world, he swallowed her screams. When Hades emerged, darkness itself couldn't hide him from his father's hunger. Each time, Rhea died a little more inside. Each time, Cronus told himself it was necessary. Each time, the universe grew sicker. The golden age was rotting from within. The king who had freed his siblings from imprisonment was now imprisoning his own children in the most horrific way possible. But here's what Cronus didn't understand. His children weren't dead. They were growing, gaining strength, learning to hate. And they were all trapped inside him, waiting for the day they could tear their way out. The Titan King thought he was preventing his own destruction. Instead, he was cultivating it, feeding it, making it stronger with every child he consumed. And Rhea? She was planning something that would change everything. Because when you take a mother's children, you don't just make an enemy. You make a force of nature bent on absolute revenge. Rhea, the mother's revenge that saved the universe. Rhea stood in the shadows of Mount Ida, cradling her newborn son in her arms. This was Zeus, her sixth child, and possibly her last hope. She had watched her husband devour 5 of their children. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, each one swallowed alive. Each one screaming as they disappeared into their father's throat. The queen of the Titans had become a mother of ghosts. She could hear them sometimes, crying from within Cronus's stomach. Her babies, trapped in divine flesh, growing stronger, but never free. Cronus demanded this child too. He was already reaching for Zeus, his eyes wild with the same paranoid hunger that had consumed him for years. But Rhea was done being a victim. She had spent months preparing for this moment, working with her mother Gaia, the earth herself, to forge a plan that would either save her children or destroy them all. As Cronus approached, Rhea made a substitution that would echo through eternity. She wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and handed it to her husband. "Here," she whispered, "your son." Cronus didn't even look. He grabbed the bundle and swallowed it whole. The stone hit his divine stomach with a sound like thunder, but he was already turning away, satisfied that another threat had been eliminated. Meanwhile, Rhea spirited Zeus away to a secret cave on Mount Ida. There, she entrusted him to the nymphs and the Curetes warrior priests who would guard him with their lives. But raising a god in secret wasn't easy. Zeus was powerful from birth. When he cried, thunder rolled across the sky. When he laughed, lightning split the heavens. The Curetes had to clash their shields and spears constantly, drowning out the sounds that would give him away. As Zeus grew, Rhea told him the truth about his father, about his siblings trapped in Cronus's stomach, about the prophecy that said one of his children would overthrow him. "That child is you," she whispered. "You are the weapon I forged to free your brothers and sisters." Zeus's eyes blazed with divine fury. He had been born for this moment, trained for this war, destined to be the one who broke the cycle of fathers devouring sons. But first, he needed allies, and Rhea had planned for that too. She sent Zeus to free the Cyclopes and Hecaton Shires, the monsters Uranus had imprisoned and Cronus had ignored. These ancient beings had been trapped so long they had forgotten hope. But when Zeus broke their chains, they felt something they hadn't experienced in eons: gratitude. The Cyclopes forged him weapons that could kill gods, lightning bolts that could shatter mountains, thunder that could deafen the cosmos. The Hecaton Shires pledged their 100 hands to his cause. Zeus was building an army, but he still needed his siblings, and that would require the most dangerous plan of all. He would have to make his father vomit up his own children. The war for the universe was about to begin, and it would be fought not between strangers, but between father and son, with the fate of all existence hanging in the balance. Zeus, the god who broke the cycle. Zeus stood at the edge of the world, lightning crackling around his fingers like living serpents. He was no longer the hidden child of Mount Ida. He was a god of war, forged in secrecy and tempered by rage. His mother Rhea had given him everything he needed. The Cyclopes had armed him with weapons that could kill titans. The Hecaton Shires had pledged their 100 hands to his cause. But the most dangerous part of his plan was still ahead. He had to face his father. Cronus sat on his throne, still paranoid, still convinced that his hunger had saved the universe from chaos. He had no idea that his youngest son was alive, grown, and coming for him. Zeus's first strike wasn't with lightning. It was with cunning. He disguised himself as a servant and approached his father with a cup of nectar. But this wasn't ordinary divine wine. Rhea had mixed it with a potion that would force Cronus to vomit up everything he had swallowed. "My lord," Zeus said, bowing low, "a drink to celebrate your eternal reign." Cronus took the cup and drank deeply. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his eyes went wide with divine horror. The potion hit him like a cosmic earthquake. His stomach convulsed. His throat burned. And then, in an explosion of divine power, he began to vomit up his children. First came Poseidon, fully grown and blazing with the power of the sea. Then Hades, dark and terrible, carrying the authority of the underworld. Hera emerged like a force of nature, her fury at their father's betrayal, making the air itself tremble. Demeter rose with the strength of the harvest. Hestia appeared like a living flame of hearth and home. Each of Zeus's siblings had spent years growing stronger inside their father's stomach, and now they were free. But the stone came last, the wrapped rock that had fooled Cronus for so long. As it hit the ground, Zeus revealed himself. "Hello, father," he said, lightning dancing between his fingers. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Cronus stared at his children in absolute terror. The prophecy was coming true. The child who would overthrow him was standing before him with an army of gods. "You," Cronus whispered. "You're supposed to be dead." "Death," Zeus replied, "is what happens to tyrants who devour their own children." The war that followed would reshape the universe. The Titanomagy. Gods against titans. Children against parents. The old order against the new. But this wasn't just about power. It was about justice. About breaking the cycle of fathers destroying sons. About proving that family could be something more than fear and betrayal. Zeus had done something no cosmic ruler had ever achieved. He had turned his siblings into allies instead of enemies. He had chosen cooperation over paranoia. And when the dust settled, when the Titans lay defeated and imprisoned in Tartarus, Zeus would face his greatest test. Would he become the tyrant his father had been? Or would he prove that some cycles can be broken? The answer would determine the fate of gods and mortals alike. The Titanomagy, the war that broke the universe, the war between gods and titans, didn't just shake the earth. It cracked the foundations of reality itself. Zeus stood with his siblings on Mount Olympus, their new stronghold rising from the mortal world toward the heavens. Across the cosmic battlefield, the Titans gathered on Mount Othrys, led by Cronus and his brothers. This wasn't just a family fight. This was a war for the soul of the universe. On one side, you had the old guard, Cronus and his generation, who believed in absolute power and ruling through fear. They had experience. They had strength. They had ruled for eons. On the other side, you had the young gods, Zeus and his siblings, who had been forged in suffering and united by survival. They had anger. They had innovation. They had nothing to lose. The battle began with Cronus hurling mountains at his children. Zeus answered with lightning bolts that split the sky. Poseidon summoned tsunamis that reached the stars. Hades opened cracks in reality that led straight to the underworld. But the Titans weren't helpless. Hyperion blazed with the light of 1,000 suns, blinding the young gods. Oceanus turned the seas against his nephew Poseidon. Themis wielded the very laws of nature as weapons. The war raged for 10 years. 10 years of cosmic destruction. 10 years of reality, bending and breaking under the strain of divine fury. Mountains were used as weapons. Oceans became projectiles. Stars fell like rain. The boundary between earth and sky dissolved under the pressure of godly rage. But Zeus had advantages his father didn't understand. He had freed the Cyclopes, and they kept forging him new weapons. Lightning bolts that could pierce Titan flesh. Thunder that could shatter divine bones. More importantly, he had the Hikitan Shires, the 100-handed giants his grandfather had imprisoned. They fought with the fury of beings who had been caged for eternity. Each Hecaton Shire could throw 100 boulders at once. When they joined the battle, the tide turned. The Titans found themselves overwhelmed by sheer volume of attacks. But the real turning point came when Zeus made a choice that would define his reign forever. Instead of fighting like his father, paranoid and alone, Zeus shared power. He gave Poseidon dominion over the seas. He granted Hades rule over the underworld. He made his siblings partners instead of rivals. The Titans, used to hierarchies and jealousy, couldn't understand this strategy. They kept fighting each other even as they fought the gods. And slowly, inevitably, they began to lose. The final battle was apocalyptic. Zeus unleashed every weapon the Cyclopes had forged. The hecaton shires through mountains like pebbles. The earth split open. The sky caught fire. When the smoke cleared, the Titans lay defeated. All except Atlas, who was condemned to hold up the heavens forever. The rest were chained and hurled into Tartarus, the cosmic prison that had been waiting for them all along. Zeus had won, but victory came with a price. The universe was broken. Reality was scarred. And somewhere in the depths of Tartarus, his father whispered new prophecies of revenge. The age of the Titans was over. The age of the Olympians had begun. But the cycle of violence? That was just getting started. Tartarus, the living prison where gods go to die, deep beneath the foundations of the world, past the roots of mountains and the bedrock of reality itself. Something ancient stirred with satisfaction. Tartarus had been waiting for this moment. The living prison, the cosmic judge, the place where the universe stored its darkest secrets. And now, finally, it was feeding. The defeated Titans plummeted through layers of existence, falling for 9 days and nights before hitting the bottom of cosmic justice. Cronus, who had devoured his own children. His brothers, who had enabled his tyranny. The old gods who had ruled through fear and paranoia. All of them, food for the hungriest entity in creation. But Tartarus wasn't just a prison. It was a living, breathing, thinking force of cosmic balance. It remembered every injustice, every abuse of power, every moment when the strong had crushed the weak, and it had opinions about its new inmates. The prison manifested around each Titan based on their crimes. Cronus found himself in a realm where he was constantly hungry but could never eat. Every time he tried to consume something, it turned to ash in his mouth. The irony wasn't lost on him. The god who had devoured his children was now starving for eternity. Other Titans faced their own personalized torments. Prometheus, who had stolen fire for mortals, would later be chained to a rock where an eagle ate his liver daily. Atlas, who had led the Titan army, was condemned to hold up the heavens forever. But here's what made Tartarus truly terrifying. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about cosmic order. The prison was intelligent. It could think. It could plan. And it was connected to every realm of existence. When gods committed crimes, Tartarus knew. When justice was needed, Tartarus was ready. It had bronze gates that no god could break. Walls that stretched beyond the concept of height. Guards that were made of pure nightmare. The Furies, born from Uranus's blood, patrolled its depths with wings of vengeance. And at the very bottom, in the deepest pit of the deepest darkness, lay the most dangerous prisoners of all. The Titans weren't the first beings Tartarus had swallowed. It had been collecting cosmic criminals since the beginning of time. Monsters that predated the gods. Entities that had been born from chaos itself. They were all waiting, watching, planning, because Tartarus had a secret. It wasn't just a prison. It was a manufacturing plant. Every scream of anguish, every moment of divine suffering, every tear of cosmic regret fed its power. And that power was growing. Zeus thought he had won the war. He thought he had broken the cycle of violence. He thought he had ushered in a new age of justice. But Tartarus knew better. It had seen this story before. The victor becomes the tyrant. The liberator becomes the oppressor. The hero becomes the villain. And when that happened, when Zeus inevitably fell to the corruption that claimed every ruler, Tartarus would be waiting. It was patient. It had eternity. And it was already planning the next war. The Titans were just the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. Because somewhere in the deepest darkness, ancient powers were stirring. Powers that remembered the time before gods. Powers that wanted their universe back. And they were almost ready to make their move. The Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants who forged lightning in the deepest forges of the earth, where lava flows like rivers and the air itself burns with divine fire, 3 brothers worked at their eternal craft. The Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who had been imprisoned since the dawn of time, Brontes, Sterops, and Arges. Their names meant thunder, lightning, and brightness. And they were about to change the course of cosmic history. These weren't just blacksmiths. They were the universe's weapons manufacturers. The beings who could forge tools that could kill gods. When Uranus had first seen his monstrous children, he had been terrified. One eye in the center of their foreheads. Strength that could reshape mountains. Intelligence that could outsmart titans. So he had shoved them back into Gaia's womb, burying them alive in the Earth's core. Cronus, when he overthrew his father, had simply ignored them, let them rot in their underground prison. He was too paranoid about his own children to worry about his uncles. But Zeus? Zeus understood something his father and grandfather never had. Sometimes the monsters are on your side. When he freed the Cyclopes from their eons of imprisonment, they didn't just thank him, they worshipped him. Here was a god who had broken their chains, who had given them freedom, who had treated them like family instead of threats. And they repaid him with the most deadly gifts in existence. For Zeus, they forged lightning bolts that could pierce any armor, shatter any shield, kill any god. Each bolt was a work of art, crackling with enough power to level mountains. For Poseidon, they crafted a trident that could control all the waters of the world. Tsunamis, hurricanes, the very tides themselves bent to his will when he held their weapon. For Hades, they created a helmet of invisibility, forged from the darkness between stars. When he wore it, he could walk through any realm unseen, unheard, untouchable. These weren't just weapons. They were instruments of revolution. Tools that would let the young gods overthrow the old order. But the Cyclopes gave Zeus something even more valuable than lightning. They gave him loyalty. Genuine, unshakable loyalty from beings who had been cast aside and forgotten. Unlike his father, who had ruled through fear, Zeus was building a coalition. The Cyclopes became his eternal allies. The Hecaton Shires joined his cause. His siblings fought beside him instead of against him. This was the difference between a tyrant and a king. Cronus had hoarded power. Zeus shared it. During the Titanomachi, the Cyclopes' weapons turned the tide. Every lightning bolt that split the sky was their craftsmanship. Every earthquake that shook the Titans was their engineering. And when the war ended, when Zeus sat on his throne as king of the gods, the Cyclopes didn't ask for rewards. They asked for the right to keep working, to keep creating, to keep forging weapons for the new order. Zeus gave them workshops on Mount Olympus, eternal positions as the gods' armorers, the respect they had been denied for millennia. But he also gave them something more dangerous, purpose, because the Cyclopes knew something Zeus was still learning. Power doesn't just corrupt the one who wields it. It corrupts everyone around them, and they would keep forging weapons. For Zeus, for his enemies, for whoever could pay the price. The one-eyed giants had helped birth the age of the Olympians, but they would also help destroy it. The Hecaton Shires, the 100-handed giants of cosmic fury. Imagine being so powerful that each one could fight an entire army alone. 3 brothers with 50 heads each and 100 arms. When they threw punches, it looked like a storm of flesh and fury. The Hecaton Shires, Briars, Codus, and Gyges, the 100-handed giants who had been the universe's first weapons of mass destruction. Like the Cyclopes, they were children of Gaia and Uranus. But where the Cyclopes were craftsmen, the Hecaton Shires were pure violence, living siege engines, biological weapons designed to end wars through overwhelming force. Uranus had taken one look at his monstrous sons and felt the same primal terror that had driven him to imprison the Cyclopes. 50 heads meant 50 minds working in perfect coordination. 100 arms meant 100 weapons striking simultaneously. They were too dangerous to live, too powerful to control, too likely to overthrow him. So he had buried them alive in the earth's depths, chained with bonds forged from the concept of imprisonment itself. For eons, they had rotted in darkness, their 100 hands clawing at stone, their 50 voices screaming in harmony. Cronus, paranoid and self-absorbed, had left them there. He was too busy devouring his own children to worry about his uncles. But Zeus saw what his father and grandfather had missed. The Hecaton Shires weren't just monsters. They were the ultimate trump card. When he broke their chains, when he freed them from their cosmic prison, they looked at him with 200 eyes, blazing with gratitude and rage. Who dares wake us? Briars rumbled, his 50 voices creating a sound like an earthquake. Your nephew, Zeus replied, and I'm offering you revenge. The word hung in the air like a promise. Revenge against Uranus, who had imprisoned them. Revenge against Cronus, who had ignored them. Revenge against the entire cosmic order that had treated them like nightmares instead of family. The Hecaton Shires smiled with 150 mouths. When they joined the war against the Titans, the battlefield transformed. Each giant could throw 100 boulders at once, 100 spears, 100 mountains. The Titans, used to one-on-one combat, found themselves facing a storm of attacks. Hyperion tried to blind them with solar fire, but 50 heads meant 100 eyes, and they could see from every angle. Oceanus summoned tsunamis, but 300 hands working together could part the seas themselves. The old gods had individual power. The Hecaton Shires had collective fury. But their greatest weapon wasn't their strength. It was their coordination. 3 beings who fought as one. A hive mind of destruction that could adapt to any threat. When the Titans fell, when the war ended, Zeus faced a choice that would define his reign. What do you do with weapons of mass destruction when the war is over? He could have imprisoned them again, locked them away like his father and grandfather had done. But Zeus had learned something from their mistakes. He made the Hecaton Shires his allies, his guardians, his ultimate deterrent. He stationed them at the gates of Tartarus, where they would guard the imprisoned Titans forever. 100 hands to hold the locks, 50 heads to watch for escapes. The Hecaton Shires became the universe's ultimate prison guards. And in return, Zeus gave them what they had been denied for eons. Respect, purpose, the chance to be heroes instead of monsters. But power like theirs doesn't just disappear. It waits. It grows. It plans. And somewhere in the depths of Tartarus, the Hecaton Shires were learning that even heroes can become villains. Hera, the queen whose jealousy became legend. Hera sat on her throne beside Zeus, radiating the kind of beauty that made mortals weep and gods tremble. She was the queen of Olympus, the goddess of marriage, the protector of wives and families. She was also the most dangerous woman in the universe. This wasn't the gentle mother figure mortals prayed to. This was a goddess forged in the stomach of a titan, tempered by betrayal, and powered by the kind of rage that could shake the heavens. Hera had been Cronus's 3rd victim, swallowed alive as an infant, trapped in divine flesh, while her father's paranoia consumed him. She had grown up in darkness, gaining power and planning revenge with every breath. When Zeus freed her, when he forced their father to vomit up his children, Hera had emerged blazing with fury and ready for war. She had fought beside her brothers in the Titanomancy, wielding marriage itself as a weapon. Because marriage, to Hera, wasn't about love. It was about power, contracts, binding oaths that couldn't be broken. When Zeus became king of the gods, she had expected to be his equal, his partner, his queen in every sense of the word. Instead, she became his victim. Zeus couldn't stay faithful. Not to her, not to anyone. He seduced mortal women, divine nymphs, and anyone else who caught his eye. Each affair was a public humiliation. Each bastard child was a slap in her face. But Hera couldn't strike back at Zeus directly. He was too powerful, too protected, too loved by the other gods. So she did something more creative. She turned her rage into an art form. Every woman Zeus seduced became Hera's target. Every child he fathered became her prey. She would hunt them across the world, through multiple lifetimes, with the patience of a goddess and the fury of a betrayed wife. Take Leto, the Titaness who bore Zeus, the twins Apollo and Artemis. Hera cursed her to wander the world, unable to give birth on any land touched by sunlight. Leto had to find a floating island that technically wasn't land to deliver her children. Or Io, the priestess Zeus turned into a cow to hide their affair. Hera sent a gadfly to sting her across the entire world, driving her mad with pain and terror. The mortal women were just the beginning. Hera's true masterpiece was Heracles, Zeus's greatest hero son. She tried to kill him as a baby, sending serpents to his crib. When that failed, she drove him insane, making him murder his own family. But here's what made Hera truly terrifying. She wasn't just petty, she was creative. Each revenge was perfectly tailored to cause maximum suffering. She understood that the cruelest punishment isn't death. It's making someone live with the consequences of their choices. Zeus thought he could have his affairs and his marriage. Hera proved him wrong. She turned every conquest into a nightmare, every moment of pleasure into lifetimes of pain. The queen of the gods had discovered something that would define her forever. If you can't have love, you can have fear. If you can't have loyalty, you can have revenge. And if you can't change your husband, you can make him pay for every betrayal. Hera's jealousy didn't just create stories. It created a template, the scorned wife who turns pain into power, the woman who refuses to be a victim. She was the goddess of marriage. But she was also the goddess of what marriage becomes when love dies and only contracts remain. Poseidon, the god who could drown the world. Poseidon rose from the depths of the ocean like a living tsunami, his trident crackling with the power to command every drop of water in existence. He was Zeus's brother, equal in power if not in authority. The god who could drown the world with a gesture. The king of the seas, the earthshaker, the master of storms. But he was also the god who never got over being second best. When Zeus had forced Cronus to vomit up his children, Poseidon had emerged first. Older, stronger, more experienced. He had expected to rule the universe himself. Instead, he had gotten the seas. Zeus kept the sky. Hades got the underworld. Poseidon got everything else. The oceans, the rivers, the lakes, the storms. It should have been enough. It should have been fair. But Poseidon had always been ambitious. And ambitious gods make dangerous allies. His domain was vast beyond comprehension. Every ocean, every sea, every drop of water that had ever existed. He could command whales the size of islands. He could summon storms that could sink entire fleets. He could shake the earth itself with his movements. But more than that, he was creative with his power. Where Zeus relied on brute force, Poseidon was subtle, elegant, terrifying in his precision. He created the first horse by striking the ground with his trident, not just any horse. A perfect stallion that could run on water, fly through air, and outrace the wind itself. He built underwater palaces that made Olympus look plain. Cities of coral and pearl where sea nymphs danced and mermaids sang. Kingdoms that mortals could only dream of. But Poseidon's true nature showed when he was crossed. He didn't just get angry. He got creative. When the Trojans refused to pay him for building their city walls, he didn't just destroy the city. He sent a sea monster to terrorize them for years. He made their offense a generational curse. When Odysseus blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, Poseidon didn't just kill the hero. He made him wander the seas for 10 years, watching his men die one by one until he arrived home broken and alone. The god of the seas understood something about power that Zeus never learned. Fear is more effective than force. Patience is more dangerous than rage. While Zeus threw lightning bolts and demanded worship, Poseidon played the long game. He built networks of sea creatures who reported to him. He cultivated relationships with coastal cities. He made himself indispensable to sailors and fishermen. But he also never forgot that he deserved better, that he should have been king, that Zeus had taken what was rightfully his. And sometimes, late at night, when the seas were calm and the storms were distant, Poseidon would practice. He would summon tsunamis and dispel them. He would shake the earth and calm it. He would rehearse the movements that could end Zeus's reign, because Poseidon knew something that would eventually consume him. The ocean is patient. It erodes mountains, drop by drop. It swallows islands, wave by wave. It outlasts everything, even gods. The Earthshaker was building his power, expanding his influence, preparing for the day when he would challenge his younger brother for the throne of the universe. And when that day came, he would be ready to drown the world if necessary to claim what was his. Hades, the god who ruled the dead, Hades sat on his throne of black marble and polished bone, surrounded by the whispers of the dead and the weight of eternity. He was the king of the underworld, the ruler of the dead, the god who commanded more subjects than Zeus and Poseidon combined. Every mortal who had ever died belonged to him. But he was also the loneliest god in existence. When the brothers had divided the universe, Hades had drawn the short straw. Zeus got the bright sky and endless glory. Poseidon got the vast oceans and eternal adventure. Hades got the realm of the dead and infinite solitude. His kingdom was vast beyond imagination. The underworld stretched through multiple realms, each designed for different types of souls. The Elysian fields for heroes, the asphodel meadows for ordinary souls, Tartarus for the damned. But vast didn't mean pleasant. Hades ruled over shadows and silence. His subjects were memories of people, not people themselves. He was surrounded by death in every form. And unlike his brothers, he couldn't just visit the world above. The moment he stepped into sunlight, flowers withered. The moment he spoke, mortals fled in terror. He was the god everyone feared, and no one wanted to meet. But Hades had adapted to his role in ways that would have surprised his brothers. He had become the universe's ultimate administrator, the cosmic accountant who kept track of every soul. He knew the name of every person who had ever lived. He knew their crimes, their virtues, their regrets. He understood mortality in ways that the other gods, obsessed with their own immortality, never could. This knowledge made him different. While Zeus was impulsive and Poseidon was passionate, Hades was patient, calculating. He thought in terms of centuries, not moments. He had also developed a sense of justice that his brothers lacked. In the underworld, everyone was equal. Kings and beggars faced the same judgment. Heroes and villains received the same treatment. Hades didn't play favorites. He didn't accept bribes. He didn't bend the rules for anyone. Death was the one force that applied to everyone equally. But ruling the dead came with a price. Hades was slowly becoming like his subjects, quiet, distant, removed from the world of the living. He watched his brothers play their games of power and politics, and he felt nothing. He saw them pursue their passions and affairs, and he felt empty. He observed their wars and conflicts, and he felt tired. Until the day he saw Persephone. The daughter of Demeter was picking flowers in a meadow when Hades first glimpsed her. She was life itself, spring personified, everything his realm lacked. And for the first time in eons, the god of the dead felt something other than duty. He felt desire, longing, the desperate need to possess something beautiful in his world of shadows. But Hades was still a god, and gods take what they want. The abduction of Persephone would change everything. It would bring seasons to the world. It would make Demeter an enemy. It would prove that even the god of the dead could fall in love. But it would also reveal something darker, that isolation doesn't create wisdom, it creates hunger. And Hades had been hungry for so very long. Demeter, the mother who starved the world, Demeter stood in the withered fields, her tears falling like poison on the barren earth. Every plant she touched died. Every seed she blessed turned to dust. The goddess of the harvest, the mother of all growing things, had become the herald of endless winter. Her daughter was gone. Persephone, the light of her existence, had vanished without a trace. One moment she was picking flowers in a meadow. The next she was nowhere to be found. Demeter had searched everywhere. Every field, every forest, every mountain. She had questioned every nymph, every satyr, every creature that might have seen her daughter. Nothing. Persephone had simply disappeared from the world. But Demeter was more than just a grieving mother. She was the force that fed the world, the power that made crops grow and harvests flourish. Without her blessing, nothing could live. And if her daughter was gone, then the world could starve. This wasn't just depression. This was cosmic revenge. Demeter had made a choice that would change the relationship between gods and mortals forever. She withdrew her power from the world. Every grain of wheat withered. Every fruit tree died. Every vegetable garden turned dust. The mortals began to starve. Not just hungry, starving. Children died in their mother's arms. Elders collapsed in the streets. Entire civilizations began to crumble. But Demeter didn't care. Let the world burn. Let mortals suffer. Let the gods face the consequences of her pain. Because she knew something the other Olympians were learning. The gods needed mortals more than mortals needed gods. Without worship, without sacrifice, without the prayers of the desperate, the gods would fade. And if the mortals died, so would the gods' power. Zeus commanded her to restore the harvests. Demeter ignored him. Poseidon threatened to flood the world. Demeter let him try. Hera promised her revenge against whoever had taken Persephone. Demeter turned away. The other gods began to panic. They were losing worshippers by the thousands. Their temples were emptying. Their priests were dying. Their very existence was threatened. But Demeter had found something stronger than divine power. She had found the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. She would search for her daughter until the stars burned out. She would mourn until the universe itself died. She would make everyone pay for her loss. Then Helios, the sun god, finally told her the truth. He had seen everything from his position in the sky. He knew what had happened to Persephone. "Your brother took her," he whispered. "Hades. He dragged her down to the underworld to be his queen." The revelation hit Demeter like a physical blow. Not just any god. Her own brother. Her own family. But it also gave her something she had lost. A target for her rage. Hades thought he could steal her daughter and hide in his realm of shadows. He thought the dead were safe from the goddess of life. He was about to learn that a mother's love is stronger than death itself, and that some betrayals can only be answered with war. Persephone, the girl who became queen of the dead. Persephone sat on a throne of black diamonds and polished obsidian, a crown of silver and shadow on her head. She was the queen of the underworld, the ruler of the dead, the goddess of spring and death combined. She was also the most tragic figure in Greek mythology. It had started with flowers. She was picking narcissus blooms in a meadow when the earth split open beneath her feet. Hades emerged from the crack like a force of nature, his chariot pulled by horses made of shadow and bone. He grabbed her without a word, without explanation, without consent. One moment she was a girl playing in sunshine. The next she was plunging into the realm of the dead. The underworld was everything her mother's world wasn't. Where Demeter's domain was life and growth, Hades' realm was death and endings. Where her mother's world was bright and warm, the underworld was cold and dark. But Persephone discovered something that would change her forever. She was more than just Demeter's daughter. She was a goddess in her own right. The dead responded to her presence. They whispered her name like a prayer. They found comfort in her voice. For the first time in their existence, they had a ruler who understood both life and death. Hades watched his young bride with growing fascination. She wasn't just beautiful, she was powerful. She could command the dead, navigate the underworld, and bring light to the darkest places. But she was also a prisoner. No matter how gilded her cage, no matter how much power she wielded, she was still trapped in a world she never chose. The pomegranate seeds changed everything. Hades offered her the fruit of the underworld, red as blood and sweet as honey. He told her it would make her truly his queen. What he didn't tell her was that eating food from the underworld would bind her to the realm forever. Persephone took 6 seeds and ate them. Not because she was hungry, not because she was fooled, but because she was tired of being a victim. If she was going to be trapped, she would be trapped on her own terms. If she was going to be queen, she would be a real queen. The transformation was immediate. Persephone became something new, not just the goddess of spring, not just the queen of the dead. She became the bridge between life and death. She could travel between worlds. She could bring the dead back to life. She could make the living experience death. She was the only goddess who truly understood both sides of existence. But power came with a price. The pomegranate seeds meant she belonged to the underworld for half the year. She could visit her mother's world, but she could never fully return to it. This created the seasons. When Persephone was with her mother, the world bloomed. When she returned to Hades, winter came. The cycle of life and death, growth and decay, became tied to her movements. But it also created something more profound. Persephone became the goddess of transformation, of change, of the idea that sometimes you have to die to become who you're meant to be. She was no longer the innocent girl picking flowers. She was the queen who commanded the dead. She was the goddess who had taken her trauma and transformed it into power. Hades had thought he was taking a bride. Instead, he had created an equal, a partner, a goddess who understood his realm better than he did. And Persephone had learned something that would define her forever. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the source of your greatest strength. Athena, the goddess who burst from Zeus's head. Zeus clutched his head in agony, divine blood streaming down his face as something terrible clawed at his skull from the inside. This wasn't just a headache. This was cosmic birth. Something was growing inside his brain, getting stronger, getting ready to tear its way out. The other gods watched in horror as their king doubled over in pain. His screams shook Olympus. His suffering made the stars themselves tremble. Then Hephaestus, the god of the forge, stepped forward with his hammer. "Let me help," he said, and brought the weapon down on Zeus's skull. The impact split the king's head open like an egg, and from the crack emerged something that would change the nature of power itself. Athena stepped out of her father's mind fully grown, fully armed, and fully brilliant. She wore golden armor that had been forged in the fires of pure thought. She carried a spear that could pierce any defense. She bore a shield that could reflect any attack. But her true weapon was her mind. She was the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and war. Not the brutal warfare that her brother Ares loved, but intelligent warfare. The kind that won battles through planning instead of strength. This wasn't a normal birth. This was the birth of an idea. Zeus had swallowed his first wife Metis while she was pregnant. He had been warned that their child would be wiser than him, powerful enough to overthrow him. So he had done what his father and grandfather had done. He had tried to prevent the prophecy by destroying the threat. But you can't swallow wisdom. You can't digest intelligence. You can't destroy an idea by eating it. Instead, Metis had continued to grow inside Zeus's mind. She had become part of his thoughts, his dreams, his decision-making process. And she had given birth to something even more dangerous than a rival god. She had given birth to a daughter who understood power better than any ruler who had ever lived. Athena looked at her father with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of ages. She knew what he had done to her mother. She knew why he had done it. And she knew something that would terrify him. She was exactly what he had feared. Wiser than him, more strategic than him, more capable than him. But she was also something he hadn't expected. Loyal. Athena understood that power without wisdom was tyranny. That strength without strategy was brutality. That intelligence without purpose was madness. She became Zeus's most trusted advisor, his strategic mind, his conscience when the weight of ruling threatened to corrupt him. But she also became something more. She became the goddess of civilization itself, the force that turned tribes into cities, conflicts into laws, chaos into order. She taught mortals how to make pottery, how to weave cloth, how to cultivate olives. She showed them that intelligence was more valuable than strength, that planning was more powerful than passion. Athens became her city, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and theater, the place where mortals learned to think for themselves. But Athena's true gift wasn't just wisdom. It was the understanding that some fights are worth fighting, that some principles are worth defending, that some truths are worth preserving. She was the goddess who proved that you could be both intelligent and strong, both strategic and moral, both wise and willing to fight. The gray-eyed goddess had emerged from her father's head as a solution to an ancient problem. How do you rule without becoming a tyrant? How do you hold power without being corrupted by it? The answer was simple. You surround yourself with wisdom. You listen to voices smarter than your own. You remember that true strength comes from understanding, not domination. Athena was Zeus's greatest achievement, not because she was powerful, but because she was proof that gods could evolve, that wisdom could triumph over violence, that the cycle of sons overthrowing fathers could be broken. But she was also his greatest threat, because wisdom, once born, has a way of asking uncomfortable questions. And some questions, once asked, can never be unanswered. Apollo, the golden god who brought light and death, Apollo stood on Mount Parnassus, his golden hair catching the morning light like liquid fire. He held his silver bow with the casual grace of someone who had never missed a shot. He was the god of music, poetry, prophecy, and the sun itself. But he was also the god who could kill you with a single arrow while composing a song about it. This wasn't just another pretty god. This was Zeus's golden boy, the perfect son who could do everything right, the divine artist who made beauty itself jealous. Apollo had been born on the floating island of Delos, where his mother Leto had finally found refuge from Hera's endless rage. Even as a baby, he had been different, more radiant, more powerful, more everything. By the time he was 4 days old, he had already forged his first bow from gold and sunlight. By the time he was a week old, he had killed his first monster, the Python, a massive serpent that had been terrorizing the oracle at Delphi. The creature was ancient, powerful, and supposedly immortal. Apollo tracked it down and filled it with golden arrows until it died screaming. Then he took over its oracle, because that's what Apollo did. He didn't just defeat enemies. He claimed their power. The oracle at Delphi became his voice to the mortal world. Through the priestess called the Pythia, he spoke prophecies that shaped the fate of kings and heroes. He told the future, but always in riddles that mortals had to figure out themselves. Apollo loved games, word games, music contests, archery competitions. He was the god who turned everything into a performance. But he was also petty in ways that would make Hera proud. When the satyr Marsyas challenged him to a music contest, Apollo won and then skinned him alive. When the mortal Niobe boasted that she had more children than his mother, Apollo killed all 14 of her kids with his arrows. The golden god had a simple rule: You could admire his talents. You could worship his beauty. But you could never, ever claim to be better than him. His love life was a disaster of epic proportions. He fell in love constantly, but his relationships always ended in tragedy. Daphne turned into a tree to escape him. Hyacinthus died in a freak accident. Cassandra rejected him, so he cursed her to speak true prophecies that no one would believe. Apollo's problem wasn't that he was cruel. It was that he was perfect. And perfection, it turns out, is terrifying to be around. Mortals couldn't relax in his presence. They felt judged, measured, found wanting. Even his gifts came with a price that most people couldn't afford. But Apollo represented something important. He was the god of civilization, of art and culture and higher learning. He showed mortals that they could be more than just animals, that they could create beauty, seek truth, and aspire to something greater. His temple at Delphi bore the inscription, "Know thyself." It wasn't just advice. It was a warning. Apollo knew himself perfectly. He knew his strengths, his weaknesses, his desires, and his limits. That self-knowledge made him powerful, but it also made him lonely. Because when you know yourself that well, you realize how different you are from everyone else. The golden god shined brightest among the Olympians. But like the sun itself, he was beautiful to look at and impossible to touch. And anyone who tried to get too close got burned. Artemis, the huntress who never missed. Artemis crouched in the forest shadows, her silver bow drawn tight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She was Zeus's daughter, Apollo's twin, and the most dangerous hunter in existence. She was also the goddess who had chosen to be alone forever. While other gods played games of love and power, Artemis had made a different choice. She had asked her father for eternal virginity, a pack of hunting hounds, and a bow that never missed its target. Zeus had given her everything she asked for. And then some. Artemis became the goddess of the hunt, the moon, and wild animals. She commanded a pack of silver deer that could outrun the wind. She led a group of nymphs who had sworn the same vow of chastity she had. But she was also the goddess of childbirth, the protector of young animals, the defender of girls who weren't ready to become women. This contradiction defined her. She was nurturing and deadly, protective and ruthless, the goddess who would help a mother give birth in the morning and kill a man for looking at her wrong in the afternoon. Her twin brother Apollo represented civilization. Artemis represented the wild, the part of nature that couldn't be tamed, controlled, or owned. She lived in the forests and mountains, far from the politics of Olympus. She didn't want temples or cities. She wanted endless forests where she could hunt forever. But Artemis had a temper that made her brother look calm. Cross her, and she would make you pay in ways you couldn't imagine. When the hunter Actaeon accidentally saw her bathing, she turned him into a stag. His own hunting dogs tore him apart without recognizing their master. When the giant hunters Otis and Ephialtes tried to kidnap her and Hera, she turned into a deer and ran between them. They threw their spears at her and ended up killing each other instead. When the people of Hyperborea stopped sending her sacrifices, she sent a plague of wild animals to destroy their crops and terrorize their children. The huntress goddess didn't just punish people. She educated them. She taught mortals that nature had rules, that the wild demanded respect, that some things were sacred and untouchable. But she also protected the innocent. Young girls who called her name were placed under her protection. Women in childbirth prayed to her for safe delivery. Animals being hunted unfairly could appeal to her for justice. Artemis understood something that the other gods had forgotten. Power wasn't about domination. It was about balance. The predator and the prey, the hunter and the hunted, life and death in perfect harmony. She was the goddess who could kill a man for disturbing her bath, then spend the night helping a doe deliver her fawn. She was cruel and kind, violent and gentle, all at the same time. Her greatest enemy was her own nature. She was a goddess of contradictions. She protected childbirth, but refused to have children. She loved animals, but was the greatest hunter. She defended women, but couldn't stand their company for long. But these contradictions made her powerful. She wasn't trying to be perfect like Apollo. She was trying to be whole. And wholeness, it turns out, includes everything: the beautiful and the terrible, the gentle and the savage, the light and the dark. Artemis had chosen to be alone, but she was never lonely. She had the forest, the hunt, and the eternal dance between predator and prey. She was the goddess who proved that sometimes the most powerful choice is the choice to walk away. Ares, the god of war who everyone hated, Ares stood on the battlefield, his bronze armor splattered with blood, his spear dripping with the lives of heroes. He was the god of war, the bringer of violence, the force that turned civilized men into savage beasts. He was also the most hated god on Olympus. While his sister Athena was loved for her strategic warfare, Ares was despised for his brutal honesty. He didn't dress up violence with noble words. He didn't pretend that war was glorious. He showed it exactly as it was. Ares was Zeus's son, but he had never been the favorite. Where Apollo was golden perfection and Athena was brilliant strategy, Ares was raw violence. The god who reminded everyone that sometimes problems could only be solved with blood. His father barely tolerated him. His mother Hera loved him, but even she was embarrassed by his methods. The other gods treated him like a necessary evil, something they needed but didn't want to acknowledge. But Ares didn't care about their approval. He had found something better than love. He had found purpose. Every time mortals went to war, they called his name. Every time soldiers charged into battle, they screamed his war cry. Every time violence erupted, he was there to guide it, channel it, and make it count. He wasn't just the god of war. He was the god of courage, the force that made ordinary people do extraordinary things when everything was on the line. His affair with Aphrodite scandalized Olympus. The goddess of love and the god of war meeting in secret, creating a passion that burned hotter than any forge. When Hephaestus caught them together, he trapped them in a golden net for all the gods to see. The other Olympians laughed at their shame, but Ares had discovered something that would change him forever. Love and war weren't opposites. They were partners. Both required courage. Both demanded sacrifice. Both could destroy everything you cared about. His relationship with Aphrodite wasn't just about passion. It was about understanding. She saw the beauty in his violence. He saw the warfare in her love. Together, they had children who embodied both their natures. Phobos and Deimos, fear and panic. Harmonia, the goddess who brought peace through strength. But Ares' true nature showed on the battlefield. He didn't favor any side. He didn't care about justice or righteousness. He cared about the fight itself. He would inspire both armies. He would give courage to cowards and strength to the weak. He would make every battle as intense, as brutal, and as decisive as possible. Because Ares understood something that the other gods had forgotten. War wasn't about winning. It was about revealing truth. About stripping away everything false and leaving only what was real. In battle, heroes showed their true nature. Cowards revealed their weakness. Leaders proved their worth. The battlefield was the universe's testing ground. Ares was hated because he was honest. He didn't pretend that violence was noble. He didn't claim that war was glorious. He simply showed mortals what they were capable of when everything else was stripped away. He was the god who proved that sometimes the most important truths are the ones no one wants to hear. The most necessary forces are the ones everyone wants to ignore. And sometimes, the most hated gods are the ones who tell the world exactly what it needs to know. Hephaestus, the broken god who forged wonders. Hephaestus limped through his workshop, his twisted leg dragging behind him as he moved between the forges that burned hotter than stars. He was the god of fire, metalworking, and craftsmanship. He was also the only god who had been born imperfect. When Hera gave birth to him, she took one look at his deformed leg and felt nothing but disgust. This wasn't the perfect son she had imagined. This was a broken thing that reminded her of her own failures. So she threw him off Mount Olympus. Hephaestus fell for 9 days and 9 nights, his infant body tumbling through clouds and sky until he crashed into the ocean. The impact should have killed him. Instead, it made him stronger. The sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome found him broken on the shore. They took him to an underwater grotto where they nursed him back to health. For 9 years, he grew up in secret, learning to work with his hands, discovering that he could create beauty even if he couldn't embody it. His first masterpiece was a golden throne, more beautiful than anything the gods had ever seen. He sent it to Olympus as a gift for his mother. Hera sat on it immediately, proud that her rejected son had finally created something worthy of her attention. Then she tried to stand up. The throne held her fast. Golden chains had wrapped around her wrists and ankles. She was trapped, imprisoned by her own son's craftsmanship. The other gods begged Hephaestus to return and free her. He refused. Let her sit there forever. Let her understand what it felt like to be trapped by someone else's choices. Finally, Dionysus got him drunk and brought him back to Olympus. Hephaestus freed his mother, but he also made his point. He might be broken, but he was powerful. Zeus, impressed by his son's skill and his spine, gave him a position on Olympus, official god of the forge, divine craftsman, the one who made the weapons that shaped the world. Hephaestus threw himself into his work with the passion of someone who had been denied everything else. He created wonders that made the other gods gasp with envy. Golden servants who could think and move. Invisible nets that could trap anyone. Weapons that could kill immortals. Armor that made heroes invincible. But his greatest creation was also his most tragic. When Zeus demanded a punishment for Prometheus's theft of fire, Hephaestus crafted Pandora, the first woman. Beautiful, curious, and doomed to bring suffering to the world. He knew what Zeus intended. He knew what would happen when Pandora opened her box. But he was a god now, with divine responsibilities. He couldn't refuse. Creating Pandora broke something inside him. He had used his gift to bring pain to the world. His art had become a weapon. But Hephaestus also found love in the most unexpected place. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, became his wife. Not because she wanted to, but because Zeus had arranged it. Everyone expected the marriage to be a disaster. The beautiful goddess and the broken god. The perfect woman and the limping craftsman. But Hephaestus loved her with the intensity of someone who had never expected to be loved back. He created jewelry that made her even more beautiful. He built palaces that were worthy of her grace. He gave her gifts that no mortal could ever match. When she betrayed him with Eris, when he caught them in his golden net, he didn't just feel anger. He felt broken all over again. But he also felt something else, understanding. Aphrodite was perfect, and perfection was its own kind of prison. She couldn't help being beautiful any more than he could help being broken. Hephaestus had learned something that would define him forever. Perfection was overrated. Broken things could be beautiful. And sometimes, the most powerful creations came from the deepest pain. He was the god who proved that your wounds could become your weapons. Your weaknesses could become your strengths. And sometimes, being thrown away was the first step toward finding where you truly belonged. Demeter, the mother who starved the world, Demeter stood in the withered fields, her hands empty of the gifts she had always given. The goddess of the harvest, the bringer of grain, the mother who fed the world. But now she was just a broken woman searching for her stolen daughter. For months, the earth had been dying. Crops turned to dust, rivers dried up, Animals starved. The mortals prayed to every god they knew, but nothing worked, because Demeter had made a promise. Until her daughter Persephone was returned, nothing would grow. Ever. It had started as a perfect day. Persephone was picking flowers in a meadow, her laughter echoing across the fields. She was young, beautiful, and completely innocent. The kind of girl who made flowers bloom just by smiling. Then the earth cracked open. Hades, the lord of the dead, exploded from the underworld of his chariot of black horses. He had been watching Persephone for months, falling in love with her joy and light. But love to Hades meant possession. He grabbed her, ignored her screams, and dragged her down to his kingdom of darkness. Demeter heard her daughter's cries from across the world. She dropped everything and began searching. She looked under every stone, behind every tree, in every cave. She found nothing. The other gods tried to help, but they feared Hades too much to confront him directly. They offered sympathy, prayers, and empty promises. Demeter didn't want sympathy. She wanted her daughter back, so she began her strike. The goddess who controlled all growing things simply stopped working. Seeds refused to sprout. Fruit rotted on trees. The earth itself seemed to forget how to be fertile. Zeus finally realized what was happening. His brother had kidnapped his daughter, and his sister was destroying the world in response. If this continued, there would be no mortals left to worship the gods. He sent Hermes to the underworld to negotiate. The message was simple: return Persephone or watch the world die. But Hades had been clever. He had given Persephone 6 pomegranate seeds to eat. Anyone who ate food in the underworld was bound to stay there forever. The rule was absolute. Even Zeus couldn't break it. But Hermes found a compromise. Persephone would spend 6 months in the underworld with Hades, and 6 months above ground with her mother. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. When Persephone returned, Demeter wept with joy. She touched the earth, and immediately flowers bloomed. She whispered to the seeds, and they burst into life. She smiled at the sky, and the sun grew warm again. But every year, when autumn came, Persephone had to return to the underworld. And every year, Demeter's grief would kill the growing things. That's why we have seasons. Spring is Persephone's return. Summer is their time together. Autumn is the sadness of separation. Winter is Demeter's mourning. Demeter had learned something that would define her forever. Love wasn't just about joy. It was about sacrifice, about fighting for what mattered most. She was the mother who proved that some bonds could never be broken, that some loves were worth starving the world for, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply refusing to give up. Persephone, the innocent girl who became queen of the dead. Persephone knelt in the underworld garden, her pale hands tending to the only flowers that could bloom in the realm of the dead. She was the queen of darkness now, but she remembered when she had been the goddess of spring. That felt like a lifetime ago. She had been picking flowers when her world ended. Narcissus, hyacinth, iris, all the blooms that made her mother smile. She was young, sheltered, and completely unprepared for what was coming. The earth had cracked open like a wound. Black horses erupted from the depths, pulling a chariot driven by the scariest man she had ever seen. Hades was everything she wasn't. Dark where she was light, ancient where she was young, serious where she was playful. He had grabbed her without asking, without explaining, without caring that she was terrified. One moment she was free, the next she was trapped in a world where the sun never shone. The underworld was beautiful in its own way. Crystal caverns, rivers of silver, gardens of precious stones, but it was also dead. Nothing grew, nothing lived, nothing changed. Hades tried to make her comfortable. He gave her a palace of black marble. He offered her jewels that sparkled like stars. He spoke to her gently, as if kindness could make up for kidnapping. But Persephone refused to eat. She wouldn't speak to him. She wouldn't look at him. She just sat in her room and cried for her mother. For weeks, she stayed strong. She knew that if she ate anything, she would be bound to the underworld forever. She could starve to death, but at least she would die free. But loneliness is a special kind of torture. Day after day of silence, of darkness, of being surrounded by the dead. She began to understand why Hades was so grim. This place would crush anyone's spirit. Finally, he offered her 6 pomegranate seeds. Just 6. Not a meal, barely a snack. But she was so hungry, so tired, so desperate for anything that looked alive. She ate them. The moment they touched her tongue, she felt the chains snap around her soul. She was bound to the underworld now, part of it. She would never be completely free again. But something else happened too. She began to change. The innocent girl who had picked flowers started to become someone harder. Someone who understood that the world was more complex than she had imagined. She learned to rule the dead. She discovered that souls needed guidance, comfort, and sometimes punishment. She became the judge who decided which spirits found peace and which faced eternal torment. The underworld needed her, not just as Hades' queen, but as someone who remembered what it was like to be alive. Someone who could show mercy to the dead. When Hermes finally came to negotiate her release, Persephone had to make a choice. She could fight the pomegranate seeds, demand complete freedom, and probably fail. Or she could accept the compromise. 6 months with her mother, 6 months with her husband. Half her life in the light, half in the darkness. She chose the compromise because she had learned something that would define her forever. Growing up meant accepting that life was complicated, that you couldn't always have what you wanted. She was the girl who became a woman by learning that some prisons could become homes, that some enemies could become partners, and that sometimes the most important choice was deciding how to make the best of what you couldn't change. Persephone had found her power in the darkest place imaginable, and she had used it to bring light to the realm of the dead. Hades, the lonely king who ruled the dead. Hades sat on his throne of black stone, watching the endless stream of souls flow through his kingdom. He was the lord of the underworld, the ruler of the dead, the god who controlled the final destination of every mortal. He was also the loneliest being in existence. When the 3 brothers had divided the world, Zeus had taken the sky, Poseidon had claimed the sea, and Hades had been left with the underworld. It seemed fair at the time, but Zeus ruled over light and celebration. Poseidon commanded storms and adventure. Hades governed death and endings. The other gods feared him. Mortals refused to speak his name. Even his own family avoided visiting his realm. He wasn't evil. He was just necessary. Someone had to judge the dead, punish the wicked, and maintain the balance between life and death. But necessity didn't make him any less alone. For centuries, he had performed his duties without complaint. He had built the perfect kingdom, rivers that sorted souls by their deeds, judges who were absolutely fair, punishments that fit every crime. But perfection was cold comfort when you had no one to share it with. And he saw Persephone. She was picking flowers in a meadow above, her laughter drifting down through the cracks in the earth. She was everything his world wasn't. Bright, joyful, alive. He watched her for months, learning her habits, memorizing her smile. She made him remember what it felt like to want something other than duty. But how could he court her? He couldn't leave the underworld for long. He couldn't bring her gifts that weren't touched by death. He couldn't even speak to her without terrifying her. So he made the choice that would haunt him forever. He took her. It wasn't love. It was desperation. The act of someone who had forgotten how to connect with another person in any way, except through force. When she refused to eat, when she cried for her mother, when she looked at him with pure hatred, he realized what he had done. He had become the monster everyone already thought he was. But he couldn't let her go, not just because of his pride, but because she was the only light his world had ever known. He tried to make amends. He gave her space, time, gifts. He spoke to her gently, hoping she would see that he wasn't the villain she imagined. But kindness after kidnapping wasn't kindness. It was manipulation. The pomegranate seeds were his last, desperate attempt to keep her. If she ate them, she would be bound to the underworld forever. But she would also hate him forever. When she finally took them, when he saw the defeat in her eyes, he felt no victory, only shame. But something unexpected happened. As the months passed, Persephone began to change. She started speaking to him, not with love, but with understanding. She saw that he wasn't evil. He was just broken, isolated by his role, corrupted by his loneliness, unable to connect with anyone in a healthy way. She began to help him rule. She brought mercy to his justice, compassion to his judgment. She made the underworld a place of healing, not just punishment. When the compromise was reached, when she was allowed to return to her mother for half the year, Hades felt both relief and terror. Relief because she would be happy. Terror because she might decide never to come back. But every autumn she returned, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She had learned to see past his mistakes to the person he was trying to become. And he had learned that love wasn't about possession. It was about partnership. Hades had found something in the darkness that he had never expected. Not just a queen, but a teacher. Someone who showed him that even the god of death could learn to live. Helios, the sun god who saw everything. Helios stood in his golden chariot, his 4 fire-breathing horses pawing the air as they prepared for another journey across the sky. He was the god of the sun, the bringer of daylight, the divine charioteer who pulled the sun from east to west every single day. He was also the god who saw everything that happened in the world. From his position high above the earth, nothing escaped his notice. He watched heroes fight monsters. He saw gods betray each other. He witnessed mortals fall in love, start wars, and build civilizations. But seeing everything came with a price. He knew secrets that could destroy kingdoms. He watched tragedies he couldn't prevent. He saw the future unfolding, but couldn't change it. His job was simple but exhausting. Every morning, he had to harness his horses and begin the journey across the sky. If he was even a few minutes late, the world would be plunged into darkness. The horses were magnificent but dangerous. They breathed fire, moved at the speed of light, and could only be controlled by someone with divine strength. One mistake, and they would burn the earth to ash. Helios had made that journey every day for thousands of years. He had never missed a single sunrise. He had never been late for a single sunset. But he was tired, bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. His son Phaethon had begged him for a chance to drive the chariot. Just once. Just to prove he was worthy of being the sun god's son. Helios had refused. The chariot was too dangerous. The horses were too powerful. Phaethon was brave, but he was still mortal. But the boy had persisted. He had sworn by the river Styx that he would be careful. He had promised to follow the exact path his father took every day. Finally, Helios had agreed. One day. One chance. What could go wrong? Everything. The horses sensed immediately that Phaethon wasn't strong enough to control them. They veered off course, diving too close to the earth and soaring too high into the heavens. Where they flew too low, deserts formed. Where they flew too high, ice caps grew. The entire world began to burn and freeze at the same time. Helios watched in horror as his son lost control completely. The boy was brave, but bravery wasn't enough. Experience couldn't be replaced by good intentions. Zeus had no choice. He struck Phaethon down with a lightning bolt, killing him instantly to save the world. Helios caught his son's body as it fell, holding him close as the light faded from his eyes. He had seen everything that happened in the world, but he had failed to see the one thing that mattered most. His son was going to die. For 7 days, Helios refused to drive the sun across the sky. The world was plunged into darkness while he mourned. Finally, the other gods convinced him to return to his duty. But something had changed. He no longer took pride in his perfect record. He no longer enjoyed the journey across the sky. He had learned that seeing everything wasn't a gift. It was a curse. Knowledge without the power to act was just another form of torture. But he also learned something else. Some responsibilities were too important to abandon, even when they brought nothing but pain. Every morning, he harnessed his horses and began the journey across the sky. Not because he wanted to, but because the world needed him to. He was the god who proved that sometimes the most heroic thing you could do was simply show up. Every day, no matter how much it hurt. And that sometimes the greatest tragedy was having the power to see everything, but the wisdom to prevent it. Hermes, the messenger who stole everything Hermes, stood at the crossroads, his winged sandals barely touching the ground, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. He was the messenger of the gods, the guide of souls, and the patron of thieves. He was also the most clever god who had ever lived. Born in a cave on Mount Selene, Hermes had shown his true nature before he was even a day old. While other baby gods cried and demanded attention, Hermes had quietly slipped out of his cradle and gone exploring. He found Apollo's sacred cattle grazing in a meadow. 50 white bulls, each one worth a fortune. Most babies would have been scared. Hermes saw opportunity. He stole the entire herd, driving them backwards so their tracks pointed the wrong way. Then he sacrificed 2 of them to the gods, invented the lyre from a tortoiseshell, and was back in his cradle before dawn. When Apollo discovered the theft, he was furious. He tracked the crime to the baby god, but Hermes just smiled innocently. "I'm just a baby," he said. "I don't even know what cattle are." Apollo dragged him before Zeus for judgment. The king of the gods took one look at his newest son and burst out laughing. Here was a baby who had outwitted the god of prophecy. This child would be interesting. Instead of punishing Hermes, Zeus gave him a job. Official messenger of the gods, divine herald, the one who could travel between all the worlds. But Hermes was more than just a messenger. He was a guide. He led souls to the underworld when they died. He escorted heroes on their quests. He showed up whenever someone needed to travel between worlds. He was also the god of commerce, communication, and cunning. Every merchant who made a clever deal invoked his name. Every traveler who needed safe passage prayed to him. Every person who lived by their wits considered him their patron. But Hermes' true gift was his ability to see connections. He understood that everything was connected to everything else. Gods to mortals, life to death, order to chaos. He was the only god who could freely travel between Olympus, Earth, and the underworld. He was the divine diplomat who could negotiate with anyone, anywhere, anytime. When Persephone was trapped in the underworld, Hermes was the one who negotiated her release. When Pandora needed to be delivered to Epimetheus, Hermes was the courier. When the gods needed to communicate with mortals, Hermes was their voice. But he was also the god of thieves and tricksters. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to mortals. He helped heroes escape from impossible situations. He showed people that sometimes the rules needed to be broken. His pranks were legendary. He once stole Poseidon's trident just to see if he could. He regularly moved Zeus's lightning bolts when his father wasn't looking. He convinced Ares to get stuck in a jar for 13 months. But Hermes' tricks always had a purpose. He wasn't cruel like some of the other gods. He was playful. He reminded everyone that life was supposed to be fun. He was also the god who understood secrets. As the messenger of the gods, he knew everyone's business. Who was sleeping with whom? Which gods were plotting against each other? what mortals were planning to do, but he kept those secrets. Not because he was loyal, but because he was smart. Information was power, and power was best used carefully. Hermes had learned something that would define him forever. The world was full of boundaries. Between gods and mortals, between life and death, between order and chaos. And boundaries, he had discovered, were made to be crossed. He was the god who proved that sometimes the most important job is the one that nobody else can do. The most valuable skill is the ability to go where others cannot. And sometimes, the greatest wisdom is knowing when to break the rules. Dionysus, the god who drove the world mad, Dionysus danced through the vineyards, his followers swirling around him in a frenzy of wine and madness. He was the god of wine, celebration, and ecstasy. He was also the god who could make you lose your mind with joy. Born twice, Dionysus had entered the world in the most dramatic way possible. His mortal mother Semele had been seduced by Zeus, who had appeared to her in human form. When the jealous Hera discovered the affair, she disguised herself as an old woman and convinced Semele to ask Zeus to appear in his true form. Zeus tried to refuse. He knew what would happen. But he had sworn an oath, and gods couldn't break their word. When he appeared as pure lightning and divine fire, Semele was instantly killed. But Zeus saved their unborn child, sewing him into his own thigh until he was ready to be born. Dionysus emerged from his father's leg fully formed, but he was different from the other gods. He was half mortal, half divine. He understood both worlds in ways that pure gods never could. Hera's hatred followed him everywhere. She drove him mad, forcing him to wander the world in a state of divine insanity. But madness, for Dionysus, became a gift. He discovered that madness could be freedom. It could break the chains of social convention. It could show people truths they were too afraid to see when they were sane. As he traveled the world, Dionysus taught mortals how to make wine. But he also taught them how to lose themselves, how to dance until they forgot their troubles, how to celebrate until they remembered what it meant to be alive. His followers, called Maenads, were mostly women who had been driven mad by his divine presence. They would roam the forests, tearing apart wild animals with their bare hands, dancing to music only they could hear. But they were also free, free from the expectations of society, free from the roles they had been forced to play, free to be wild, dangerous, and completely themselves. Dionysus wasn't just the god of wine. He was the god of transformation. He showed people that they could become something other than what they were born to be. He was also the god of theater. He invented drama, comedy, and tragedy. He showed mortals that they could explore different lives, different emotions, different possibilities by pretending to be someone else. But his gifts came with a price. The line between ecstasy and madness was thin. People who followed him too closely could lose themselves completely. They could become so free that they forgot how to be human. King Pentheus of Thebes learned this lesson the hard way. He refused to acknowledge Dionysus as a god, forbidding his people to worship him. Dionysus drove all the women of the city mad, including Pentheus's own mother. In their frenzy, they tore the king apart with their bare hands. His mother carried his head back to the city, thinking it was the head of a lion she had killed. Only when she reached the palace did she realize she had murdered her own son. Dionysus had proven his point. He was a god. He demanded respect, and those who denied him would pay the ultimate price. But he was also the god of second chances. He could drive you mad, but he could also restore your sanity. He could destroy your old life, but he could also give you a new one. He was the god who understood that sometimes you had to lose yourself to find yourself, that sometimes the greatest truths could only be seen through madness, and that sometimes the most profound experiences were the ones that left you changed forever. Dionysus was the god who proved that life was meant to be lived, not just endured. that joy was as important as wisdom. And that sometimes the most divine thing you could do was to completely lose your mind. Aphrodite, the goddess who started wars with her beauty. Aphrodite rose from the sea foam like a living dream, her beauty so perfect that it made gods weep and mortals go mad with desire. She was the goddess of love, beauty, and sexual passion. She was also the most dangerous woman who had ever existed. Born from the sea where Uranus's severed genitals had fallen, Aphrodite had entered the world fully formed and completely irresistible. The waves themselves had shaped her body. The ocean had given her its power. The foam had blessed her with eternal youth. When she first stepped onto the shores of Cyprus, flowers bloomed at her footsteps. The wind grew gentle. The sun shone brighter. Even the stones beneath her feet seemed to glow with newfound beauty. But Aphrodite's beauty wasn't just physical. It was a weapon, a force of nature that could topple kingdoms and destroy heroes. She knew the power she held. Every glance was calculated. Every smile was a strategy. Every gesture was designed to make people fall in love with her. The gods fought over her like children over a toy. Zeus wanted her for himself. Poseidon offered her the ocean. Hades promised her dominion over the dead. But Zeus, fearing that her beauty would cause war among the gods, married her to Hephaestus, the broken god of the forge, the one Olympian who couldn't threaten Zeus's rule. It was a disaster from the beginning. Hephaestus loved her with the desperate intensity of someone who had never expected to be loved back. Aphrodite felt nothing but contempt for his weakness. She turned to Ares, the god of war. Where Hephaestus was gentle and giving, Ares was brutal and taking. Where her husband created beauty, her lover destroyed it. Their affair was the worst-kept secret on Olympus. Everyone knew. Everyone whispered. But no one dared to confront her directly. When Hephaestus finally caught them together, trapping them in his golden net, Aphrodite felt no shame. She felt annoyed. How dare he embarrass her? How dare he treat her like a possession? But her true nature showed in her dealings with mortals. She was the goddess who could make anyone fall in love with anyone. She could create passion, destroy marriages, and rewrite the rules of desire. The golden apple that started the Trojan War was her masterpiece. When Paris was asked to judge which goddess was most beautiful, Aphrodite bribed him with the promise of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. It didn't matter that Helen was already married. It didn't matter that stealing her would cause a war. Aphrodite wanted to win, and she was willing to sacrifice thousands of lives to prove her point. The 10-year war that followed was her greatest victory. Heroes died for beauty. Kings fell for desire. An entire civilization was destroyed because one goddess couldn't bear to lose a beauty contest. But Aphrodite wasn't just cruel. She was also the goddess who made life worth living. She gave mortals the ability to love deeply, to create families, to find joy in each other's company. She was the force that made people write poetry, create art, and build beautiful things. She inspired the greatest love stories ever told. She showed mortals that some things were worth dying for, but her love always came with a price. She was jealous, petty, and vengeful. Cross her, and she would make you fall in love with someone who would destroy you. She was the goddess who proved that beauty was power, that desire was a weapon, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who made you want to surrender. Aphrodite had learned something that would define her forever. Love wasn't about happiness, it was about control. The person who could make others fall in love held the ultimate power, and she intended to use it. Pandora, the first woman who doomed humanity, Pandora, knelt beside the mysterious box, her fingers trembling as they traced its intricate carvings. She was the first woman ever created, crafted by the gods themselves as the ultimate weapon against humanity. She was also the most curious person who had ever lived. Hephaestus had molded her from clay and fire, shaping her with the same skill he used to forge weapons for the gods. But every Olympian had contributed to her creation, each adding their own gift to make her perfect. Athena had given her wisdom and skill in crafts. Aphrodite had blessed her with beauty that could stop men's hearts. Apollo had granted her musical talent. Hermes had given her persuasion and cunning. But Zeus had added the final touch, an insatiable curiosity that would drive her to seek answers to every question, no matter the cost. She was created to be irresistible, not just physically, but intellectually. Men would want to possess her beauty. Women would want to learn her secrets. Everyone would trust her completely, because Pandora was Zeus's revenge on humanity. Prometheus had stolen fire from the gods and given it to mortals. The humans had grown too clever, too independent, too dangerous. They needed to be reminded of their place. Pandora was delivered to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, as a gift. The Titan had been warned never to accept gifts from the gods, but when he saw her, all his caution vanished. She was everything he had ever wanted: beautiful, intelligent, charming, and completely devoted to him. He married her immediately, convinced that the gods had finally forgiven humanity. But Pandora had brought a wedding gift, a beautiful box covered in gold and precious stones, with a lock that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. "Never open this," Zeus had told her. "It contains things that mortals are not meant to see." For months, Pandora resisted. She was happy with her new life. She loved Epimetheus. She enjoyed learning about the world. But the box called to her. In quiet moments, she could hear something moving inside, something that wanted to be free. Her curiosity grew stronger every day. What could be so dangerous that the gods themselves feared it? What secrets were hidden in that beautiful container? Finally, she could resist no longer. When Epimetheus was away, she approached the box with trembling hands. The lock opened at her touch, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The moment she lifted the lid, darkness exploded into the world. Not just physical darkness, but spiritual darkness. All the evils that had never existed before poured out like a flood. Disease, war, famine, hatred, jealousy, greed, despair. Every form of suffering that would ever plague humanity escaped in that instant. Pandora tried to close the box, but it was too late. The evils were already spreading across the world, infecting every human heart, poisoning every relationship, destroying the paradise that mortals had known. But just as she was about to give up, she heard a small voice from inside the box. One last thing remained, something that had been placed there deliberately: hope. The final gift wasn't an evil at all. It was the one thing that would allow humanity to survive everything else. The ability to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. Pandora released hope into the world, and suddenly the darkness didn't seem quite so overwhelming. Humans could suffer disease, but they could hope for healing. They could face war, but they could hope for peace. She had doomed humanity, but she had also saved it. She had given mortals the capacity for suffering, but also the strength to endure it. Pandora had learned something that would define her forever. Curiosity was both humanity's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. The need to know could lead to wisdom or disaster, but it was also what made humans human. The desire to understand, to explore, to push boundaries. The refusal to accept that some things were forbidden. She was the woman who proved that knowledge always came with a price, that some doors, once opened, could never be closed, and that sometimes the most important gifts were the ones that came wrapped in suffering. Pandora had opened the box that changed everything, but she had also given humanity the one thing it needed to survive what came next: the hope that they could handle whatever the gods threw at them. Selene, the moon goddess who loved immortal Selene, drifted across the night sky in her silver chariot, her pale light washing over the sleeping world. She was the goddess of the moon, the bringer of gentle darkness, the divine huntress who ruled the night. She was also hopelessly in love with a mortal man. Night after night, She had watched him from above. Endymion, the most beautiful shepherd who had ever lived. He tended his flocks on Mount Latmus, completely unaware that a goddess was watching his every move. He was everything she wasn't, mortal where she was immortal, earthbound where she was celestial, temporary where she was eternal. But when she looked at him, she felt something she had never experienced before. Not just desire, but peace. A quiet joy that made her want to stop her journey across the sky and simply watch him sleep. For months, she resisted. She was a goddess. He was a mortal. The distance between them was literally cosmic. But love doesn't care about logic. It doesn't respect boundaries. It just is. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. She descended from her chariot and appeared to him in human form. She was beautiful, mysterious, and completely enchanted by his simple kindness. They spent the night talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his sheep, his dreams, his fears. She told him about the stars, the night, the beauty of the world seen from above. When dawn came, she had to leave. But she promised to return the next night, and the next, and the next. Their love affair was perfect in its simplicity. Every night, they would meet. Every dawn, they would part. She would spend the day thinking about him. He would spend the day waiting for her. But mortals age. They grow old, sick, and eventually die. Selene watched in horror as tiny lines appeared around Endymion's eyes, as his hair began to show threads of silver. She was losing him, and there was nothing she could do about it. Finally, she made a desperate choice. She went to Zeus and begged him for a favor. Make Endymion immortal. Let him live forever so they could be together. Zeus agreed, but with a twist. He would grant Endymion eternal life, but only if he slept forever. He would never age, never die, but he would also never wake up. Selene had to choose. Watch him grow old and die, or keep him young and beautiful but asleep forever. She chose eternal sleep. Every night, she visits him in his cave on Mount Latmus. She sits beside his sleeping form, strokes his hair, and whispers about her day. He never responds. He never moves. But he's still there. Still beautiful. Still young. Still hers. Some people think she made the wrong choice. That love without interaction isn't really love at all. That she turned him into a beautiful statue instead of a partner. But Selene knows something they don't. She has forever. And forever is a long time to find a way to wake him up. Every night she tries something new. A kiss. A song. A tear. Maybe tonight will be the night he opens his eyes. Maybe tonight will be the night their love story truly begins. She is the goddess who proved that some loves are worth any sacrifice. That some people are worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to give up hope. Hecate, the witch goddess who controlled the crossroads. Hecate stood at the crossroads where three paths met, her torches casting dancing shadows in the darkness. She was the goddess of magic, the queen of witches, the divine sorceress who controlled the boundaries between worlds. She was also the most feared god that mortals never talked about. Where other gods ruled from temples and mountains, Hecate commanded from the spaces in between. Crossroads, doorways, the thin places where one world touched another. She was the goddess you called when you needed something that couldn't be found anywhere else. When you needed to speak to the dead. When you needed to curse an enemy. When you needed to find something that was lost forever. But her help always came with a price. Born from the union of the titans Perses and Asteria, Hecate was old power. Ancient magic from before the Olympians ruled the world. Zeus had tried to control her, but she was too wild, too independent, too dangerous. So he made a deal with her instead. She could keep her power, her freedom, and her secrets. In exchange, she would help the other gods when they needed her special skills. It was an arrangement that worked for everyone. except the mortals. Because Hecate's magic was real, not the flashy lightning bolts of Zeus or the obvious strength of Heracles. This was subtle power, the kind that could change your life without you even knowing it was happening. She taught mortals how to make potions, cast spells, and speak to spirits. She showed them that the world was full of hidden doors that could be opened if you knew the right words. But she also taught them that knowledge was dangerous, that some doors should stay closed, that some powers came with costs you couldn't afford to pay. Her followers were mostly women, outcasts who had been rejected by society, widows who had lost everything, girls who were too strange for normal life. She gave them power when no one else would. She showed them that being different wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. But she also demanded loyalty. Betray her, and you would discover that there were fates worse than death. When Persephone was kidnapped, Hecate was the only one who heard her screams. She was the one who helped Demeter search for her daughter. She was the one who negotiated the terms of her return. Not because she was kind, but because she understood that some bonds were sacred, that some crimes demanded punishment. She became Persephone's guide in the underworld, teaching her how to rule the dead, how to judge souls, how to find light in the darkest places. But she also made sure that Hades never forgot what he had done. Every time he looked at his wife, he saw Hecate watching from the shadows, reminding him that some actions could never be undone. Her magic was different from the other gods. It wasn't about power over others. It was about power over yourself, the ability to change your fate, to rewrite your story, to become something other than what you were born to be. But it required sacrifice. To gain something, you had to lose something else. To become powerful, you had to accept that you would never be normal. Hecate stood at the crossroads because that's where decisions were made, where people had to choose which path to take, where fate could be changed if you were brave enough to pay the price. She was the goddess who proved that magic was real, but it wasn't free. That power was possible, but it came with consequences. And that sometimes, the most important choice was deciding whether you were strong enough to live with what you had become. Nyx, the night goddess who even Zeus feared Nyx, spread her star-spangled cloak across the sky, bringing darkness to the world with the gentle touch of a mother tucking her children into bed. She was the goddess of night, the primordial force older than the Olympians, the divine mother who had given birth to dreams and death. She was also the only being that Zeus was afraid to fight. Born from chaos itself, Nyx was ancient power. She had existed before the Titans, before the gods, before the very concept of light and darkness had meaning. She was the night that came before the first day, the darkness that would remain after the last star died, the endless void that held all possibilities within its embrace. Her children were the forces that shaped mortal life. Hypnos, the god of sleep; Thanatos, the god of death; the Fates, who wove the threads of destiny; dreams and nightmares, love and strife, hope and despair. She had given birth to them all without needing a partner. She was creation itself, the cosmic mother who brought forth life from nothing. But she was also terrifying, not because she was cruel, but because she was inevitable. Every day ended with her arrival. Every life concluded in her embrace. Zeus had learned to fear her during his early days as king of the gods. Hypnos, her son, had helped Hera trick Zeus into a deep sleep. When Zeus woke up and discovered the betrayal, he flew into a rage. He chased Hypnos across the sky, lightning bolts crackling around him, promising terrible punishment. But Hypnos fled to his mother. The moment Zeus saw Nyx, his anger died. He stopped mid-flight, his lightning fading, his threats forgotten, because he remembered who she was, what she was. She was the darkness that even gods feared, the primordial force that could swallow light itself, the mother who had brought forth death, and who could take it away just as easily. Zeus backed down. He apologized. He promised never to threaten her son again. It was the only time in his reign that he had ever retreated from a fight. But Nyx wasn't interested in power games. She didn't want to rule Olympus or control the mortal world. She wanted to do her job, to bring night to the world, to give mortals rest, dreams, and the peace that came with darkness. She was the goddess who understood that endings were just as important as beginnings, that rest was just as necessary as action, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was to let someone sleep. Her palace was made of shadows and starlight, floating between the earth and the heavens. It was a place where day and night met, where the boundaries between waking and sleeping dissolved. She shared it with her children, but also with anyone who needed refuge. Broken heroes, tired gods, mortals who had lost their way in the light. In her darkness, they found peace. In her silence, they found answers. In her embrace, they found the rest they had been searching for. But she was also the goddess who held the ultimate power, the ability to bring eternal night, to end the world not with fire or flood, but with endless darkness. She never used that power. She never even threatened to use it. But everyone knew it was there, the quiet threat that kept the other gods honest, the reminder that some forces were too ancient and too powerful to be controlled. Nyx was the goddess who proved that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who never picked a fight, that the greatest power was sometimes the power to simply walk away, and that sometimes the most terrifying thing wasn't what someone could do to you. It was what they chose not to do. Eos, the dawn goddess who loved too much. Eos rose from her bed of roses, her rosy fingers painting the eastern sky with the first light of morning. She was the goddess of dawn, the herald of the sun, the divine beauty who brought hope to the world every single day. She was also cursed to fall in love with mortals who could never love her back. Her crime had been simple. She had fallen in love with Ares, the god of war. They had shared a passionate affair, stealing moments between battles, finding peace in each other's arms. But Aphrodite was jealous. The goddess of love couldn't bear the thought of anyone else experiencing the kind of passion she claimed to control. So she cursed Eos with the cruelest punishment she could imagine: eternal love for mortals. Men who would age, die, and leave her heartbroken over and over again. The curse was perfect in its cruelty. Eos would fall in love completely, helplessly, desperately. But mortals would see her as just another beautiful woman. They would never understand that she was a goddess. They would never realize that her love was literally divine. Her first victim was Tithonus, a Trojan prince so handsome that he made other men weep with envy. Eos fell in love with him instantly, completely, forever. She kidnapped him, bringing him to her palace in the east, where the sun was born every morning. She loved him with the intensity of someone who had never been loved back. But mortals age. They grow old, weak, and eventually die. Eos watched in horror as Tithonus began to change. Gray hairs appeared, lines formed around his eyes, his strength began to fade. Desperate, she went to Zeus and begged him for a favor. Make Tithonus immortal. Let him live forever, so they could be together. Zeus agreed, but he was feeling mischievous. He granted Tithonus eternal life, but not eternal youth. The prince would live forever, but he would continue to age. Eos watched her beloved become an old man, then an ancient one, then something barely human. His mind faded. His body withered, but he couldn't die. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore. She turned him into a cicada, a creature that would sing to her every morning, but never be able to speak of his suffering. But the curse wasn't finished with her. She fell in love again, and again, and again. Each time, she hoped it would be different. Each time, she believed that this mortal would be the one to break the curse. Each time, she was wrong. She loved hunters, heroes, princes and poets. She gave them everything she had. She showed them wonders beyond mortal imagination. She offered them a love that was literally divine. But they all left her, through death, betrayal, or simple human nature. They all left her standing alone in the eastern sky, painting the dawn with tears instead of light. Yet every morning she rose again. She brought light to the world. She heralded the sun. She gave mortals hope for a new day. Not because she was happy, but because it was her job. Because the world needed dawn, even if dawn brought nothing but pain to the one who created it. She was the goddess who proved that love could be a curse as well as a blessing. That sometimes the most beautiful things came from the deepest suffering. And that sometimes the most heroic thing you could do was to keep bringing light to the world, even when your own world was nothing but darkness. Ys rose every morning, painting the sky with hope, because someone had to. Because the world deserved beauty, even if the one who created it would never find it for herself. Daphne, the nymph who chose trees over gods. Daphne ran through the forest, her feet barely touching the ground as she raced between the trees. She was a river nymph, daughter of the river god Peneus, and she had never been happier than when she was alone in the woods. She didn't want marriage. She didn't want children. She didn't want any of the things that other girls dreamed about. She just wanted to be free. Her father worried about her. He wanted grandchildren, a son-in-law, the normal life that came with having a daughter. But Daphne had made her choice. She would stay unmarried forever. She was the girl who preferred trees to people, animals to conversations, silence to the noise of civilization. Then Apollo saw her. The sun god was walking through the forest after killing Python, feeling proud of his victory. He spotted Daphne running between the trees and fell in love instantly. She was beautiful, wild, and completely uninterested in him. That made him want her even more. Apollo began chasing her, not just that day, but every day. He would appear wherever she went, showering her with gifts, poems, and promises. He told her about his palace on Mount Olympus. He offered her immortality. He promised to make her the most famous woman in the world. Daphne didn't want any of it. She ran faster. She hid deeper in the forest. She begged her father to protect her from the persistent god. But Apollo was faster than any mortal. He was stronger than any human. He was a god, and he was used to getting what he wanted. The final chase lasted for hours. Apollo pursued her through valleys and over mountains. He called out promises, threats, and pleas. Daphne's strength was failing. Her legs were giving out. She could hear Apollo getting closer. In desperation, she cried out to her father, "Save me, change me. I'd rather be anything than his." Peneus heard his daughter's prayer. Just as Apollo reached for her, just as his fingers touched her shoulder, the transformation began. Her feet grew roots that dug deep into the earth. Her skin became bark. Her arms stretched into branches. Her hair turned into leaves that rustled in the wind. Apollo grabbed nothing but a tree. He stood there, holding the laurel tree that had been the girl he loved. He could feel her heart beating in the trunk. He could hear her voice whispering in the leaves. "If you cannot be my wife," he said, "then you will be my tree. Your leaves will crown the heads of heroes. Your branches will be symbols of victory." He made the laurel tree sacred. Champions would wear crowns of laurel leaves. Poets would be honored with laurel wreaths. Daphne had escaped marriage, but she had paid the ultimate price. She was free, but she was also trapped forever. She was the girl who proved that sometimes the only way to keep your freedom was to give up your life. Hyacinthus, the boy who died for love. Hyacinthus was the most beautiful boy in Sparta. Golden hair, perfect features, and a smile that could make gods weep with envy. He was a prince, an athlete, and completely unaware of how dangerous his beauty was. 2 gods loved him. Apollo, the god of music and poetry. Zephyrus, the god of the west wind. Both were powerful. Both were jealous. Both would do anything to win his heart. Apollo arrived first. He appeared as a handsome young man, offering to teach Hyacinthus music, poetry, and the arts of civilization. The boy was charmed. Apollo was funny, talented, and treated him like an equal instead of a child. They spent every day together. Apollo taught him to play the lyre. Hyacinthus taught Apollo how to hunt and run. They became best friends, then something more. But Zephyrus was watching. The wind god had loved Hyacinthus from afar, hoping the boy would notice him. Instead, he watched Apollo steal the heart he thought belonged to him. Jealousy is a poison that turns love into hatred. Zephyrus began planning his revenge. Apollo and Hyacinthus were playing discus one afternoon. The sun god threw the heavy disc high into the air, showing off his strength. Hyacinthus ran to catch it, laughing as he sprinted across the field. That's when Zephyrus struck. He sent a gust of wind that caught the discus mid-flight. Instead of landing safely, it spun around and struck Hyacinthus in the head. The boy collapsed instantly. Blood poured from his skull. His beautiful face went pale. Apollo ran to him, cradling the dying boy in his arms. He tried to heal him, using all his divine power. But some wounds are too deep, even for gods. "Don't leave me," Apollo whispered. "Please don't leave me." But Hyacinthus was already gone. The laughter, the music, the joy they had shared, all of it ended in a single moment. Apollo's grief was like a storm. He wept for days. He refused to eat, to sleep, to bring light to the world. But tears couldn't bring back the dead. So Apollo did the only thing he could. He transformed Hyacinthus into a flower, a beautiful hyacinth that would bloom every spring. Purple petals marked with what looked like the letters A, the Greek cry of sorrow. Zephyrus got his revenge, but it tasted like ash. The boy he loved was dead. The rival he hated was destroyed by grief. No one had won. Every spring, when the hyacinth flowers bloom, people remember the boy who died because two gods couldn't share. The prince who paid the price for being too beautiful. Love had killed him, but love also made him immortal. He was the boy who proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could be was perfect. Helios, the sun god who couldn't say no, Helios stood before his son Phaethon, seeing his own eyes staring back at him. The boy was 17, brave, and desperate to prove he was worthy of being a god's son. "Let me drive the chariot," Phaethon begged. "Just once. I need to know what it feels like to be like you." Helios had driven the sun across the sky every single day for thousands of years. He knew how dangerous it was. The horses were made of fire. The chariot moved faster than lightning. One mistake could destroy the world. But Phaethon was his son, his only son, and the boy looked at him with such hope, such trust. "Please, father, I swear by the river Styx I'll be careful." The oath of the Styx was unbreakable. Even gods couldn't take back a promise made on that sacred river. Helios felt his heart breaking. He wanted to say no. He should have said no. Instead, he said yes. The next morning, Phaethon climbed into the golden chariot. The 4 fire-breathing horses snorted and pawed the air, eager to begin their journey. "Follow the path exactly," Helios warned. "Don't go too high or too low. Hold the reins tight, and whatever happens, don't let go." Phaethon nodded, grinning with excitement. He looked so young, so confident, so alive. The horses launched into the sky. For the first few minutes, everything went perfectly. Phaethon followed the path his father had shown him. The sun rose normally. The world stayed in balance. Then the horses realized something was wrong. They could smell fear. They could feel weakness. The person holding the reins wasn't their master. They began to test him. First, they veered slightly off course. When Phaethon tried to correct them, they fought back. They dove toward the earth, then soared too high into the heavens. The boy pulled on the reins with all his strength, but he was just mortal. The horses were divine fire given form. They went into a complete panic. Where they flew too low, deserts formed. Rivers dried up. Forests burst into flames. Where they flew too high, ice caps grew and oceans froze. The entire world began burning and freezing at the same time. Phaethon screamed for help, but he was alone in the sky. Below him, millions of people were dying. Above him, the stars were melting. Zeus saw what was happening. He had no choice. The lightning bolt struck Phaethon in the chest, killing him instantly. The boy's body fell from the chariot like a burning star. Helios caught his son as he fell, holding him close as the light faded from his eyes. For 7 days, Helios refused to drive the sun. The world was plunged into darkness while he mourned. He had said yes to save his son's pride. Instead, he had killed him. But the world needed light. People needed hope. The sun had to rise. So every morning, Helios climbed back into his chariot. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He was the father who learned that love sometimes meant saying no, and that the hardest part of being a parent was living with the consequences of your choices. Ares, the god of war nobody wanted Ares, stood on the battlefield, covered in blood and grinning like a madman. Around him, soldiers fought and died while he watched with pure joy. He was the god of war, the divine force that turned neighbors into enemies and heroes into corpses. He was also the most hated god on Olympus. Even his own father, Zeus, couldn't stand him. "You're nothing but trouble," Zeus would say. "Violence and bloodshed, that's all you bring." But someone had to be the god of war. Someone had to represent the savage side of human nature. Ares had drawn the short straw. He wasn't like Athena, who represented strategy and noble warfare. He was raw violence, the berserker rage that made men forget their names and fight like animals. He loved every minute of it. The other gods saw war as a necessary evil. Ares saw it as the most honest thing humans did. All their politics, their philosophies, their pretty words, it all came down to who could hit harder. He was the god who told uncomfortable truths. His greatest enemy was Athena, his half-sister. She fought with wisdom and planning. He fought with fury and instinct. They clashed constantly, both in council and on the battlefield. She would devise brilliant strategies. He would charge straight into danger, roaring like a beast. Usually she won, but Ares had something she didn't. He had passion. When he loved completely. When he hated forever. His greatest love was Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. She was married to Hephaestus, the ugly god of forges. But she found something irresistible about Ares. Maybe it was his danger. Maybe it was his honesty. Maybe it was because he was the only god who wasn't afraid to be exactly what he was. They carried on a secret affair for years, meeting in hidden places, stealing moments between battles and festivals. But secrets don't stay secret forever. Hephaestus caught them. He trapped them in a golden net while they were together, then called all the gods to witness their shame. The other gods laughed. They pointed. They made jokes that would last for centuries. Ares didn't care. He wasn't ashamed of loving someone. He wasn't sorry for being himself. "You can laugh," he told them, "but at least I'm honest about what I am." He was the god who represented the part of humanity that civilized people tried to hide. The violence, the rage, the primitive need to fight. But he was also the god who fought for what he believed in, who loved without compromise, who never pretended to be something he wasn't. In a pantheon full of hypocrites and liars, Ares was brutally honest. He was the god nobody wanted, but everyone needed. The reminder that civilization was just a thin layer over something much more savage. And that sometimes the most necessary people were the ones everyone else hated. Eileithyia, the goddess who controlled birth. Eileithyia knelt beside the woman in labor, her hands glowing with divine power as she eased the child into the world. She was the goddess of childbirth, the divine midwife who decided whether babies lived or died. She was also Hera's most loyal daughter. That combination made her one of the most feared gods in existence. When Hera was angry with Zeus's lovers, she didn't just punish them. She sent Eileithyia to make their births a nightmare. The goddess could make labor last for days. She could twist babies in the womb. She could delay birth until both mother and child died. She was the goddess who turned the miracle of life into a weapon of revenge. Her most famous victim was Leto, the Titaness who had been seduced by Zeus. When Hera discovered the affair, she flew into a rage. "No land will give her shelter," Hera declared, "and no birth will come easy." She sent Eileithyia to follow Leto wherever she went. The pregnant Titaness wandered the earth, begging for a place to give birth. Every island, every city, every cave turned her away. They knew that helping Zeus's lover would bring Hera's wrath down on them. Finally, Leto found Delos, a floating island that had nothing left to lose. She collapsed on the rocky shore, her labor beginning, but Eileithyia was waiting. For 9 days and 9 nights, she held back the birth. Leto screamed in agony as her children fought to be born. Her body was tearing apart, but the goddess wouldn't let nature take its course. The other gods begged Hera to show mercy. Even Zeus pleaded with his wife to end the torture, but Hera had made her decision. Leto would pay for stealing her husband. Finally, the gods offered Eileithyia a bribe she couldn't refuse. A golden necklace that would make her the most beautiful goddess on Olympus. She accepted. The moment she released her power, Leto gave birth to twins. First Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. Then Apollo, the god of music and prophecy. Both children were born with a hatred for Hera that would last forever. Eileithyia had done her job. She had served her mother faithfully. She had punished Zeus's lover. But she had also created 2 of the most powerful gods in existence. 2 enemies who would never forget what Hera had done to their mother. She was the goddess who proved that loyalty could be more dangerous than rebellion, that following orders didn't make you innocent, and that sometimes the most terrible power was the ability to delay a miracle. Every mother who struggled in labor knew her name. Every child who fought to be born felt her presence. She was the goddess who stood at the threshold between life and death, deciding who would pass through and who would be trapped forever. Alcyoneus, the giant who couldn't die. Alcyoneus stood on his native soil, feeling the earth's power flowing through his massive body. He was the strongest of the giants, the son of Gaia, who had been born to destroy the gods. He was also completely immortal as long as he stayed on his homeland. The war between the gods and giants had been raging for years. His brothers were falling one by one, killed by the Olympians and their mortal allies. But Alcyoneus was different. Every time someone wounded him, the earth healed him. Every time someone struck him down, he rose again. He was the giant who couldn't be killed. The gods had tried everything. Zeus had hit him with lightning bolts. Poseidon had sent earthquakes. Athena had used her wisdom to devise clever traps. Nothing worked. Alcyoneus would laugh as their attacks bounced off him. He would regenerate from the most terrible wounds. He would stand up from blows that should have shattered mountains. The earth itself was keeping him alive. He began to believe he was truly invincible. He started taking bigger risks, fighting harder, pushing deeper into Olympian territory. He even stole Zeus's sacred cattle, driving the immortal herd to his own lands as a trophy. The gods were desperate. They were losing the war because they couldn't kill their strongest enemy. Then Heracles arrived. The hero had been fighting giants all across Greece. He had learned their weaknesses, their fears, their limitations. Most importantly, he had learned to think like a hunter. Heracles studied Alcyoneus carefully. He watched how the giant fought, how he moved, how he reacted to different attacks. Then he noticed something crucial. Alcyoneus never left his homeland. He would chase enemies to the border, then stop. He would fight fiercely, but only on his own soil. The hero realized the truth. The giant's immortality was tied to his native land. Heracles devised a plan. He would attack Alcyoneus, wound him badly, and drag him away from his homeland before he could heal. The battle was fierce. Alcyoneus fought like a man possessed, throwing boulders and breathing fire. But Heracles had fought worse monsters. When the giant stumbled, Heracles struck. He grabbed Alcyoneus by the ankle and began dragging him toward the border. The giant realized what was happening. He clawed at the ground, trying to stay connected to his homeland. He begged his mother Gaia for help, but it was too late. The moment Alcyoneus crossed the border, his immortality disappeared. His wounds stopped healing. His strength began to fail. Heracles killed him with a single arrow. The strongest giant, the son who couldn't die, was gone. The other giants saw their champion fall and lost hope. If Alcyoneus could die, anyone could die. The war began to turn in favor of the gods. He was the giant who proved that every strength was also a weakness, that immortality always came with a price, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply step outside your comfort zone. Porphyrion, the giant who challenged Zeus. Porphyrion stood at the peak of Mount Olympus, his massive hands wrapped around Zeus's throat. He was the king of the giants, the son of Gaia, who had been born to rule in place of the gods. He was also completely insane. The war between gods and giants had reached its climax. His brothers were dying, his army was scattered, and the earth itself was being torn apart by the battle. But Porphyrion didn't care about winning anymore. He just wanted to hurt Zeus. He had been the smartest of the giants, the one who understood that brute force wouldn't be enough to defeat the gods. He had made alliances with monsters. He had studied the gods' weaknesses. He had planned strategies that even Athena respected. But strategy only worked if you stayed sane. The moment Porphyrion saw Hera, Zeus's wife, something snapped in his mind. She was beautiful, powerful, and completely out of reach. He decided he wanted her. Not just wanted, needed. Obsessed. He began planning not just Zeus's death, but his replacement. He would kill the king of the gods, marry his wife, and rule Olympus as the new divine king. It was the stupidest plan any giant had ever conceived. During the final battle, Porphyrion fought his way through the divine army. He shrugged off lightning bolts, ignored earthquakes, and crushed heroes under his feet. He had one goal: reach Zeus and Hera. When he finally confronted them, he made his intentions clear. "I'm going to kill your husband," he told Hera. "Then you're going to be my queen." Hera looked at him with pure disgust. "You're insane." "I'm in love," Porphyrion replied. Zeus was furious, but he was also confused. This giant was supposed to be the smart one. Why was he acting like a lovesick fool? Then he realized what was happening. Hera's divine beauty was driving the giant mad. Her mere presence was destroying his mind. Zeus began to laugh. "You want my wife? Try to take her." The battle was epic. Porphyrion fought with the strength of madness, throwing mountains and breathing fire. Zeus countered with lightning and thunder that shook the universe. But the giant was fighting for love, not victory. He made reckless attacks, took unnecessary risks, and ignored his own safety. Finally, he managed to grab Zeus by the throat. For a moment, it looked like he might actually win. That's when Heracles arrived. The hero shot Porphyrion with a poisoned arrow, right through the heart. The giant's grip loosened. His strength failed. As he fell, he looked at Hera one last time. "I would have loved you," he gasped. "I know," she replied. "That's why you had to die. The king of the giants was dead. The war was over. The gods had won." But Porphyrion had achieved something none of his brothers had. He had made Zeus afraid. Because for just a moment, the king of the gods had seen what it would be like to lose everything he cared about. He was the giant who proved that love could be more dangerous than hate. That obsession could destroy even the strongest mind, and that sometimes the most terrifying enemy was the one who had nothing left to lose. Eurytus, the giant who fought with arrows. Eurytus knelt on the battlefield, his massive bow drawn back as he aimed at the gods themselves. He was the archer of the giants, the son of Gaia, who had mastered the art of war from a distance. He was also the only giant who understood that sometimes the smartest thing to do was run. While his brothers charged headfirst into battle, Eurytus stayed back. He studied his enemies, learned their patterns, and struck when they least expected it. He was the giant who fought like a hunter. His arrows were made from the bones of ancient monsters. His bowstring was woven from the hair of the Furies. His aim was perfect. He had never missed a shot in his life. The gods learned to fear him. Unlike other giants who announced their attacks with roars and earthquakes, Eurytus was silent, deadly, patient. He would hide in the mountains for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then his arrow would fly, and another god would fall. Apollo, the god of archery, respected him. "He's good," Apollo admitted. "Better than most gods." That was the highest praise a giant could receive. Eurytus had killed 3 minor gods and wounded dozens more. He had turned the war into a deadly game of hide and seek. But he had one weakness. He was completely loyal to his family. When his brothers were dying, when the war was clearly lost, Eurytus made a choice that would doom him. He came out of hiding. Instead of continuing to fight from the shadows, he stood with his remaining brothers for a final battle. It was suicide, and he knew it. But he couldn't live with the shame of surviving while his family died. The last battle was chaos. Giants and gods clashed in a fight that shook the earth. Eurytus stood on a cliff, his arrows flying faster than lightning. He hit Zeus 3 times. He wounded Poseidon. He nearly killed Hermes. But there were too many enemies. His arrows, no matter how perfect, couldn't stop an entire army. Dionysus, the god of wine, came for him. The young god had been hit by one of Eurytus's arrows and wanted revenge. "You're a coward," Dionysus shouted. Fighting from a distance, like a weakling, Eurytus laughed. "I'm smart. There's a difference." He shot an arrow that passed so close to Dionysus's head it trimmed his hair. The god stumbled backward, terrified. "But you're right about one thing," Eurytus continued. "I am a coward. I should have stayed hidden." He drew his final arrow, the one he had been saving for Zeus. Instead, he aimed it at his own heart. "I won't die by your hand," he said. "I'll die by my own choice." The arrow flew true. Eurytus fell to his knees, then collapsed. The greatest archer in the war was dead by his own skill. The gods stared in silence. They had expected him to fight to the end, to rage against his fate. Instead, he had chosen his own death with the same precision he had brought to everything else. He was the giant who proved that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit defeat. That wisdom meant knowing when to fight and when to stop. And that sometimes, the most powerful weapon was the ability to choose your own ending. Dionysus, the god who went mad Dionysus, sat in the middle of a burning city, laughing as the flames danced around him. He was the god of wine, madness, and celebration. He was also completely insane. Most people think of him as the party god, the fun one who brought wine to humans and taught them how to have a good time. They're wrong. Dionysus was dangerous. He was chaos wrapped in a smile. He was the god who could make you dance until you died. His birth almost killed him. His mother was Semele, a mortal woman who had caught Zeus's attention. When Hera found out about the affair, she disguised herself as an old woman and tricked Semele. "Ask Zeus to appear to you in his true form," Hera whispered. "If he really loves you, he'll do it." Semele made Zeus promise. The king of the gods tried to refuse, but oaths were binding. When Zeus appeared as pure lightning, Semele was burned to ash instantly, but her unborn baby was still alive. Zeus cut the child from her womb and sewed him into his own thigh. Dionysus was born from his father's leg, already touched by divine madness. He grew up knowing that his mother had died because of him. That knowledge poisoned his mind. Dionysus traveled the world, teaching humans about wine. But his gifts always came with a price. People who refused to worship him went mad. People who worshipped him too much also went mad. He was the god who gave you exactly what you asked for, and watched you destroy yourself with it. His followers were called Maenads, women who had given up everything to follow him. They would dance in the mountains, tear animals apart with their bare hands, and eat raw meat. They were completely happy. They were also completely insane. Dionysus loved them because they understood something other people didn't. Sometimes madness was the only honest response to the world. He was the god who proved that there was a thin line between celebration and destruction. That joy could be just as dangerous as anger. When people drank wine, they were tasting his madness. When they lost control, they were experiencing his gift. He was the god who showed humans their true nature. And sometimes, that nature was terrifying. Semele, the mother who asked for too much. Semele stood in her bedroom, waiting for Zeus to keep his promise. She was a mortal princess who had been chosen by the king of the gods himself. She should have been the happiest woman alive. Instead, she was about to die. It started when Zeus noticed her dancing at a festival. She was beautiful, graceful, and completely unaware that a god was watching her. Zeus fell in love instantly. He appeared to her as a handsome stranger and began courting her like a mortal man. For months, they were happy. He would visit her in secret, bringing gifts and stories from across the world. She thought she had found the perfect lover. Then she got pregnant. That's when Hera found out. The queen of the gods was furious, but she was also clever. She didn't attack Semele directly. Instead, she came up with a plan that would destroy the girl using her own love against her. Hera disguised herself as Semele's old nurse. She appeared at the palace, looking frail and worried. "My dear," she said, "I'm concerned about this lover of yours. How do you know he's really Zeus?" Semele was confused. "What do you mean?" "Anyone can claim to be a god," Hera continued. "But if he really loves you, he'll prove it. Ask him to appear to you in his true form. No disguises, no tricks, just pure divine power." The idea planted itself in Semele's mind. She began to doubt. Was her lover really Zeus, or just some man pretending to be a god? The next time Zeus visited, she asked him to swear by the river Styx that he would grant her one wish. Zeus, drunk on love and wine, agreed without thinking. "Show me your true form," Semele said. "Appear to me as you really are." Zeus realized his mistake immediately. "Please," he begged, "ask for anything else. Gold, immortality, power, but not this." But oaths sworn on the Styx couldn't be broken. Even gods had to keep their word. Zeus appeared as pure lightning, thunder, and divine fire, the raw power of the storm itself. Semele was incinerated instantly. Her body turned to ash in seconds. But Zeus saved their unborn child. He cut the baby from her womb and sewed him into his own thigh. That child would become Dionysus, the god of wine and madness. Semele had gotten exactly what she asked for. She had seen her lover's true form. It had killed her. She was the woman who proved that sometimes love wasn't enough. That curiosity could be more dangerous than doubt. and that the gods' greatest gifts were often their most terrible curses. Clytius, a giant who fought fire with fire. Clytius stood in the middle of the battlefield, his entire body burning with black flames. He was one of the giants, born from Gaia's blood to destroy the gods. He was also completely immune to fire. While his brothers fought with rocks and clubs, Clytius had mastered the element that gods feared most. He could create flames that burned cold, fire that froze instead of melted. He was the giant who had turned the gods' own weapon against them. The war between gods and giants had been going on for years. His brothers were strong, but they fought like animals. Clytius fought like a general. He studied his enemies. He learned their weaknesses. He discovered that most gods were terrified of fire because it reminded them of their father Zeus's lightning. So he became fire itself. His flames were different from normal fire. They burned black and cold. They could freeze water and shatter stone. They could burn through divine armor like it was paper. The gods didn't know how to fight him. Water made his flames stronger. Wind spread them further. Even Zeus's lightning couldn't touch him. He became the most feared giant in the war. Clytius had killed 12 minor gods and wounded dozens more. He had burned down 3 divine cities and turned entire forests into frozen wastelands. But he had one weakness. He was completely alone. His brothers thought he was a freak. His enemies were terrified of him. Even his own mother, Gaia, feared what he had become. He was the giant who had gained power by giving up everything else. The gods tried everything to defeat him. They sent armies, heroes, and monsters. Nothing worked. Then Hecate, the goddess of magic, had an idea. She couldn't defeat Clytius with force, but she could defeat him with loneliness. She created an illusion of a beautiful woman who wasn't afraid of his flames, someone who could touch him without being burned. Clytius fell in love instantly. For the first time in his life, he wasn't alone. But the woman was just magic. When he tried to kiss her, she disappeared. The realization broke something inside him. He had been so desperate for connection that he had believed an obvious lie. In that moment of weakness, Hecate struck. Her magic couldn't hurt him directly, but it could turn his own flames against him. Clytius burned from the inside out, destroyed by the power he had mastered. He was the giant who proved that strength without love was just another kind of weakness, that even the most powerful person could be defeated by their own loneliness. And that sometimes the cruelest weapon was hope. Mimas, the giant who copied gods Mimas, stood on Mount Vesuvius, his body slowly turning to stone as the volcano erupted around him. He was one of the giants, born to destroy the gods. He was also the giant who had tried to become one. While his brothers fought with brute force, Mimas had a different plan. He would study the gods, copy their powers, and beat them at their own game. He was the giant who believed that knowledge was stronger than strength. Mimas spent years watching the gods. He learned how Zeus threw lightning, how Poseidon controlled earthquakes, how Hades opened doorways to the underworld. Then he began copying them. He couldn't match their power exactly, but he could come close. His lightning was weaker than Zeus's, but it was still lightning. His earthquakes were smaller than Poseidon's, but they could still level cities. He became the most dangerous giant in the war because he was the most unpredictable. The gods never knew what power he would use next. He could fly like Hermes, become invisible like Hades, or heal wounds like Apollo. He was like fighting 12 gods at once. But copying power wasn't the same as understanding it. Mimas knew how to use divine abilities, but he didn't know why they worked. That ignorance would destroy him. During a battle with Hephaestus, the god of forges, Mimas tried to copy his power over volcanoes. He thought it would be simple, just make the mountain explode. But Hephaestus's power wasn't just about destruction. It was about creation, balance, and understanding the earth's deep fires. Mimas grabbed control of Mount Vesuvius without understanding what he was doing. Instead of creating a weapon, he created a disaster. The volcano exploded with the force of 1,000 lightning bolts. Lava poured down the mountain like a river of fire. Mimas was caught in the center of the eruption. His body began turning to stone as the heat overwhelmed him. He tried to copy another god's power to escape, but it was too late. The lava had already reached his heart. As he died, he finally understood the difference between copying and creating, between knowledge and wisdom. He was the giant who proved that stealing power wasn't the same as earning it. That shortcuts always came with a price, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was pretend to be something you weren't. His body became part of the mountain itself, a stone giant trapped forever in the volcano you'd tried to control. Hephaestus, the god who built heaven. Hephaestus stood in his forge, hammering a piece of metal that glowed like a star. He was the god of fire, metalworking, and creation. He was also the ugliest god on Olympus. While his brothers and sisters were beautiful, Hephaestus was deformed. His legs were twisted, his face was scarred, and his hands were permanently stained with soot. His own mother, Hera, had thrown him off Mount Olympus because she was ashamed of how he looked. But ugly didn't mean useless. Hephaestus had fallen into the ocean, where he was rescued by sea nymphs. They raised him in an underwater cave, teaching him to work with fire and metal. He discovered he had a gift. He could create things that no one else could imagine. His first masterpiece was a golden net, so fine it was invisible. He used it to catch his wife Aphrodite cheating on him with Ares. He trapped them both and called all the gods to witness their shame. The gods laughed at Aphrodite and Ares, but they were also impressed. How had the ugly god created something so clever? That's when they realized what Hephaestus really was. Not just a metal worker, but an artist. A creator who could turn raw materials into miracles. He built Zeus's thunderbolts. He created Athena's armor. He forged chains strong enough to hold titans. But his greatest creations were more than just weapons. He built automatic servants made of gold. He created fire that never went out. He made jewelry that could grant wishes. He was the god who proved that true beauty came from what you could create, not how you looked. The other gods needed him. They might mock his appearance, but they couldn't live without his gifts. When giants attacked Olympus, Hephaestus didn't fight with sword or spear. He opened up the earth itself, turning mountains into volcanoes that buried entire armies. He was the god who had learned that the best revenge was being indispensable. His forge was the heart of Olympus. Every divine weapon, every magical item, every piece of heavenly architecture came from his hands. He had been thrown away like garbage, but he had built himself into the most important god in heaven. He was the god who proved that being different wasn't the same as being worthless. That skill mattered more than beauty, and that sometimes the people who hurt you the most were the ones who needed you the most. Pallas, the giant who fought with wisdom Pallas, stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching his brothers die one by one. He was the smartest of the giants, born from Gaia's blood to destroy the gods. He was also the only one who knew they were going to lose. While his brothers fought with rage and strength, Pallas fought with strategy and planning. He had studied every battle, analyzed every defeat, and come to a terrible conclusion. The giants couldn't win, not with force. But maybe they could win with wisdom. Pallas had a different plan. Instead of trying to destroy the gods, he would try to replace them. He would prove that giants could rule better than Olympians. He began by creating his own city. While his brothers waged war, Pallas built a civilization. He gathered the wisest humans, the most skilled craftsmen, and the most powerful magicians. Together, they created something that had never existed before. A city ruled by knowledge instead of fear. In Pallas's city, problems were solved through debate, not violence. Resources were shared fairly. Everyone had a voice in how things were run. It was everything Olympus wasn't. The gods noticed. They saw humans thriving under giant rule and began to worry. What if people decided they didn't need gods anymore? Athena, the goddess of wisdom, came to see Pallas's city herself. She expected to find chaos and destruction. Instead, she found perfection. The city was beautiful, peaceful, and prosperous. People were happy. Art flourished. Knowledge grew. Pallas had done something no god had ever managed. He had created a society that actually worked. Athena was impressed, but she was also threatened. If a giant could rule better than gods, what did that say about divine right? She challenged Pallas to a contest, not of strength, but of wisdom. They would each try to give humanity the greatest gift. Whoever succeeded would rule both the city and its people. Pallas thought for days. What could he give humans that would improve their lives forever? He decided to give them the secret of immortality, not just for heroes or kings, but for everyone. It was the most generous gift anyone had ever offered. Athena gave them the olive tree, food, oil, wood, and medicine, all from one plant. The humans chose Athena's gift. Pallas was devastated. He had offered them eternal life, and they had chosen a tree. Why? He asked them. Because, they said, we don't want to live forever. We want to live well. Pallas realized his mistake. He had been so focused on giving them what he thought they needed that he had forgotten to ask what they wanted. Athena had won through understanding, not superiority. The city fell to the gods. Pallas was killed in the final battle. But his idea lived on. The concept that rulers should serve their people, not the other way around. He was the giant who proved that being right wasn't the same as being wise. That the best leaders were the ones who listened. And that sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you could do was ask a simple question. What do you want? Enceladus, the giant who wouldn't stay dead. Enceladus lay trapped under Mount Etna, his body crushed by the weight of the entire mountain. He was one of the giants, born to destroy the gods. He was also the giant who refused to die. The war between gods and giants was over. His brothers were dead. His mother had abandoned him. The gods had won. But Enceladus kept fighting. Every time he moved, the mountain shook. Every time he breathed, lava poured from the peak. Every time he tried to escape, earthquakes split the ground. He was the giant who had turned his own prison into a weapon. Enceladus had been the strongest of his brothers. Not the smartest, not the most skilled, but the one who never gave up. When other giants fell in battle, they stayed down. When Enceladus fell, he got back up. He had been killed 7 times during the war. Each time, he had somehow survived. Each time, he had come back angrier. Finally, Athena had trapped him under Mount Etna. The weight of the mountain was supposed to keep him down forever. It didn't work. Enceladus spent centuries learning how to use his prison. He discovered that his movements could trigger volcanic eruptions. His anger could create earthquakes. He became more dangerous trapped than he had ever been free. The gods tried everything to stop him. They piled more mountains on top of him. They cast spells to put him to sleep. They even tried to reason with him. Nothing worked. Enceladus had found something stronger than hope. He had found spite. He didn't care if he ever escaped. He didn't care if he won. He just wanted to make sure the gods never forgot what they had done. Every earthquake was a reminder. Every eruption was a message. Every time the mountain shook, it was Enceladus saying, "I'm still here." The people who lived near Mount Etna learned to read his moods. When he was angry, they fled. When he was sad, they mourned with him. They understood something the gods didn't. Enceladus wasn't just a monster. He was a prisoner. And prisoners had nothing to lose. He was the giant who proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to give up. That persistence could be more dangerous than strength, and that sometimes the best revenge was simply surviving. Thousands of years later, people still feel his presence. Every time Mount Etna erupts, they know Enceladus is still fighting, still refusing to die, still proving that some battles never end. Hippias, the giant who rode lightning, Hippias charged across the battlefield on a horse made of pure lightning, his massive spear crackling with electric power. He was one of the giants, born to destroy the gods. He was also the only giant who had learned to ride the storm itself. While his brothers fought on foot, Hippias had tamed the wildest forces of nature. His horse was formed from captured lightning bolts. His armor was made from solidified thunder. He was the giant who had turned the sky into his weapon. Hippias had always been different from his brothers. They were earth creatures, born from blood and soil. But he had always looked up instead of down. He studied the way lightning moved. He learned the patterns of storms. He understood that the sky wasn't empty. It was full of power waiting to be controlled. His first mount was a regular horse. But during a thunderstorm, lightning struck both of them. Instead of dying, they were transformed. The horse became living electricity. Hippias gained the ability to control storms. He was the giant who had accidentally discovered how to steal power from Zeus himself. In battle, Hippias was unstoppable. He could appear anywhere instantly. His spear could pierce any armor. His horse could run through solid rock. But his greatest power was fear. When enemies saw him riding lightning across the battlefield, they knew they were fighting something beyond their understanding. The gods were terrified of him. He was using their own element against them. Zeus took it personally. Lightning was his symbol, his weapon, his identity. Having a giant ride, it was like having someone steal his crown. The king of the gods decided to handle Hippias personally. The battle was epic. Zeus threw thunderbolts that could shatter mountains. Hippias rode lightning that could split the sky. They fought for 3 days and 3 nights. The storm they created was so powerful it threatened to destroy the world. Finally, Zeus realized he couldn't win through force. Hippias had mastered lightning just as well as he had. So Zeus used wisdom instead of power. He created a lightning bolt that looked exactly like all the others. But this one was different. It was hollow inside, filled with divine sleep powder. When Hippias caught it to add to his horse's power, the sleep powder exploded. Both horse and rider collapsed instantly. Zeus struck while they were unconscious, killing them both with a single perfect lightning bolt. Hippias died, still holding the reins of his electric horse. He was the giant who proved that you could steal power, but you couldn't steal wisdom. That mastering a weapon wasn't the same as understanding it. And that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one who fought like you. His body became part of the storm itself. Some say that when lightning strikes in strange patterns, it's Hippias still trying to ride the sky, still trying to prove that giants could master the heavens. Gratian, the giant who fought death itself, Gratian stood in the middle of a graveyard, his body slowly rotting away as he fought. He was one of the giants, born to destroy the gods. He was also the giant who had made a deal with death. While his brothers fought with weapons and magic, Gratian had found a different power. He couldn't be killed by anything that was alive. He was the giant who had turned his own death into a weapon. The curse started during the first battle. Gratian was struck by a poisoned arrow that should have killed him instantly. Instead, he began to rot from the inside out. But he didn't die. He kept fighting, even as his flesh fell away. He discovered that death had made him stronger. His rotting body couldn't feel pain. His exposed bones were harder than armor. His empty eye sockets could see things that living eyes couldn't. He was the giant who had learned that sometimes losing everything was the only way to win. Gratian's new power came with a price. He could only be hurt by things that were already dead. Living weapons bounced off him. Divine magic couldn't touch him. But a simple bone knife could cut him deep. The gods didn't understand at first. They threw their strongest attacks at him and watched them fail. Meanwhile, Gratian kept fighting, getting stronger with each wound. He began collecting the bones of fallen enemies. He made weapons from their skulls. He wore their ribs as armor. He was the giant who had built an army from the dead. The war turned into a nightmare. Gratian would walk through battles, untouchable and terrible. Every god who died became part of his power. Finally, Diana, the goddess of the hunt, figured out his weakness. She couldn't kill him with living weapons, but she could kill him with dead ones. She made arrows from the bones of ancient monsters. She carved a bow from the spine of a dead dragon. She dipped her arrowheads in the blood of fallen titans. When she shot Gratian, the arrow went straight through his heart. But even as he died, Gratian smiled. He had proven something important. Death wasn't the end. It was just another beginning. He was the giant who showed that sometimes the scariest monsters were the ones who had nothing left to lose. And that death was just another kind of power. Orpheus, the man who made gods cry. Orpheus sat by the river, his lyre silent in his hands. He was the greatest musician who ever lived. He was also the man who had lost everything. When Orpheus played music, the world stopped to listen. Trees would uproot themselves to get closer. Rivers would change course to hear him better. Even the gods would pause their wars to listen. His music was so beautiful, could make stones weep. But none of that mattered now. His wife was dead, and all the music in the world couldn't bring her back. Eurydice had been perfect. She was kind, gentle, and the only person who truly understood his music. When she listened to him play, she didn't just hear notes, she heard his soul. They had been married for exactly 1 day when the snake bit her. Orpheus had been playing at their wedding when he heard her scream. By the time he reached her, the poison had already spread through her body. She died in his arms, still wearing her wedding dress. Orpheus played a song so sad that the entire world mourned with him. Flowers withered. The sun dimmed. Even the gods in heaven began to cry. But tears couldn't bring back the dead. So Orpheus made a decision that no living person had ever made. He would go to the underworld and bring his wife back. Everyone told him it was impossible. The dead couldn't return to life. Even gods couldn't change that rule. Orpheus didn't care. He had found something stronger than death itself. He traveled to the entrance of the underworld, where Cerberus, the three-headed dog, guarded the gates. The monster had never let a living soul pass. But when Orpheus played his lyre, Cerberus began to cry. The fierce guardian laid down and let the musician pass. Orpheus walked through the realm of the dead, playing his lyre. Every soul he passed stopped to listen. Every monster became gentle. Every punishment was paused. Even the tormented spirits found peace in his music. Finally, he reached the throne room of Hades himself. The god of the dead sat next to his wife Persephone, ruling over the souls of the departed. "Give me back my wife," Orpheus said simply. Hades laughed. No living person can change the laws of death. So Orpheus played. He played about love that was stronger than fear, about hope that survived in darkness, about the beauty that death couldn't touch. When he finished, Hades was crying. Persephone was sobbing. Every soul in the underworld was weeping. "I'll make you a deal," Hades said. "You can have your wife back, but you must lead her out of the underworld without looking back. If you turn around even once, she returns to me forever." Orpheus agreed instantly. He began the long journey back to the surface, playing his lyre to guide Eurydice behind him. He could hear her footsteps. He could feel her presence. But he couldn't see her face. The journey took forever. Every step was agony. Every moment, he wanted to turn around and make sure she was still there. But he kept walking, kept playing, kept believing. Finally, he saw sunlight ahead. They were almost free. That's when doubt crept in. What if it was a trick? What if she wasn't really there? Just before they reached the surface, Orpheus turned around. He saw Eurydice for one perfect moment, smiling at him with love and pride. Then she faded away like smoke. "I love you," she whispered as she disappeared back into the darkness. Orpheus had broken the one rule that mattered. He was the man who proved that love could move mountains, part seas, and make gods weep. But it couldn't overcome a moment of doubt. Eurydice, the woman who chose love over life, Eurydice stood at the edge of the underworld, watching her husband walk away from her forever. She was dead, killed by a snake on her wedding day. She was also the woman who had just given up her only chance at life. When Orpheus had come to rescue her, she had been amazed. No living person had ever entered the realm of the dead. No one had ever made Hades cry. But her husband had done both. The deal was simple. Follow Orpheus back to the surface without him looking back. If he turned around even once, she would return to death forever. Eurydice had agreed, but she was also terrified. She knew her husband better than anyone. She knew how much he loved her. She knew how desperate he was to see her face. She knew he would turn around. As they walked through the underworld, Eurydice could have called out. She could have reassured him. She could have made the journey easier. But she stayed silent. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She realized something during that long walk. Orpheus had come to save her, but he had also come to prove something to himself. He needed to know that his love was stronger than death itself. If she made it easy for him, he would never really know. He would always wonder if he could have done it alone. So she let him struggle. She let him doubt. She let him face the hardest test of his life. When they finally reached the surface, Eurydice could see the sunlight ahead. She could smell the flowers. She could hear the birds singing. She could have life again. But she also knew that Orpheus was about to turn around. She could feel his doubt growing with every step. In that moment, she made a choice. She could call out to him. She could save them both. Or she could let him learn the truth about love. Eurydice chose truth. When Orpheus turned around, she smiled at him, not with sadness, but with pride. She had seen him do the impossible. She had watched him move heaven and earth for her. That was enough. "I love you," she whispered as she faded back into darkness. She wasn't angry. She wasn't disappointed. She was grateful. She had been loved so deeply that someone had challenged death itself for her. Most people never experienced love like that. Eurydice returned to the underworld, but she wasn't the same person who had died. She was the woman who had inspired the greatest love story ever told. She became a legend, a symbol of love that transcended death. But most importantly, she became free. She had chosen love over life, truth over comfort, her husband's growth over her own survival. She was the woman who proved that sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was letting them become who they were meant to be, even if it cost you everything. Hades, the god who ruled the dead Hades, sat on his throne in the underworld, surrounded by millions of souls. He was the god of the dead, ruler of the afterlife. He was also the loneliest god in existence. While his brothers Zeus and Poseidon ruled the bright worlds above, Hades had been given the darkest realm of all, a place where no flowers grew, where no music played, where hope came to die. He was the god that everyone feared, but no one understood. Hades hadn't chosen to rule the dead. When the three brothers divided the world after defeating their father, they had drawn lots. Zeus got the sky. Poseidon got the sea. Hades got everything else. Everything else turned out to be the realm of the dead. At first, Hades had been bitter. His brothers got to rule over life and beauty. He got to rule over endings and sorrow. But slowly, he began to understand his purpose. Death wasn't the enemy. Death was the teacher. Every soul that came to his realm had a story. Every ghost had lived, loved, and lost. Every spirit had faced the same fears that haunted the living. Hades became the god who heard every last word, who witnessed every final breath, who understood what people truly valued when everything else was stripped away. He learned that power meant nothing without purpose, that beauty meant nothing without kindness, that life meant nothing without love. The underworld changed him. He became the most just of all the gods. When souls arrived in his realm, he didn't judge them by their wealth or status. He judged them by their choices. The wicked were punished. The good were rewarded. The ordinary were treated with dignity. He was the god who proved that fairness was possible, even in the darkest places. But justice came at a price. Hades became isolated from the world above. Other gods avoided him. Mortals feared him. Even his own family treated him like a stranger. He was the god who was necessary, but never wanted, and Persephone arrived. She had been kidnapped, brought to his realm against her will. Hades had fallen in love with her the moment he saw her. But love built on kidnapping wasn't really love at all. Slowly, carefully, Hades began to court her properly. He showed her the beauty hidden in his dark realm. He shared his wisdom about life and death. He proved that he could be gentle as well as just. Persephone began to see him not as a monster, but as a man who had been given an impossible job and had chosen to do it well. She fell in love with his kindness, his loneliness, his quiet strength. When the time came for her to leave, she chose to stay for half the year. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Hades finally had someone who understood him, someone who saw past his dark reputation to the caring person beneath. He was the god who proved that even the darkest places could bloom with love, that endings could be beginnings, and that sometimes the most important job was the one nobody wanted. When Orpheus came to rescue Eurydice, Hades could have refused. The laws of death were absolute. But he saw something in the musician's love that reminded him of his own journey. He let Eurydice go, knowing that Orpheus would probably fail. Not because he was cruel, but because he understood something about love that others didn't. The greatest love stories weren't about success. They were about the attempt. Hades was the god who taught the world that death wasn't the opposite of life. It was the thing that made life meaningful. And in the end, that wisdom was worth more than all the power in heaven. But remember, every ending is also a beginning. Every myth that ends makes room for a new one to begin. The gods gave us the gift of stories. Now we give that gift to others. And the cycle continues, as it always has, as it always will, forever and ever, without end. Just like the stories themselves,